call this meeting to order. It is Monday, June 10th. This is a regular meeting of the Richfield School Board. In attendance this evening, we have board members Tim Paulus, Crystal Brocky, John Ashmead, Peter Tensing, Paula Cole. We have Superintendent Unowski, and I am Chair Christine Malik. I would like to remind us of the Richfield Public Schools mission statement. Richfield Public Schools inspires and empowers each individual to learn, grow, and excel. We will keep this in the forefront of our minds as we work together this evening. We will start with review and approval of the agenda, if anyone is prepared to make a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Pellis, a second by Mr. Ashmead. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the agenda is approved. We will start with information and proposals, non-action items, and public comment. If you were not able to sign up for public comment today, there are alternative ways to reach out to us. You can fill out the board comment sheet, where you can write your thoughts and give them to us tonight, and we will review them before the next meeting, or you can request to participate in a public comment section for a future board meeting. So we will start with Carly Kidd, if you want to go to the podium.
Ready to speak into the mic?
Yes, please.
Good evening. My name is Carly Kidd, and I am a parent of 3 children here in the district, 1 at the middle school, 2 at RDLS. First, I just wanted to briefly talk about my involvement in this facility project to start with. I started last spring being involved with the facility planning committee, working with Wold Architectures, and I'm not remembering the name of everybody involved, but part of the planning group. We met at least 4 times in the spring, last spring, and I was there as a parent representative. It was a group made up of administration, other staff members, kind of everybody that kind of had a stake in this process. And so from very early on, especially after the community survey results came back, it became pretty clear, in my opinion, that that the community was not interested in spending taxpayer money on athletic facilities. They were interested in spending their money and giving their money to academics, to staff resources, which would do things like help reduce class sizes, and for safety and security and long-term facility maintenance. Those were things all that the community approved of. And so kind of as part of that planning process, our group at the time was charged with kind of coming up with a list of priorities. And the athletic facilities fell to the bottom of that list of priorities because of that feedback from the community survey and from direction given by the school board. And things like safety and security kind of flew up to the top of that list. And the safety and security with our students at STEM is a super high priority. The traffic flow situation there now is what I would call dangerous. And I believe that our students there deserve the best solution for that problem, not a second best solution. And so I also am concerned with where money for specifically upkeep of the pool ongoing would come from. I understand that, to maybe get it up and running again, I've heard $4.5 million. I've heard some people say, well, it's actually not going to cost that much. It would be less. However much that would cost, if that's fundraised, great, whatever. But the ongoing cost is something that is not necessarily in the school district's budget right now. It's not expected. It's something up and new. And I would hate to see that money have to come from something else, whether that be teacher salaries. I feel like we're making really great headway, especially after the referendum and operating budget that passed in November. I would hate to see money come away from things that we're doing now, like finally we're reducing class sizes, we're hiring more teachers, we're hiring social workers at buildings that we haven't had them before. These are all things that are coming from this increase in the operating budget, and those are all really good things. Those are going to have really great positive effects on our students. And so I would be really concerned about where this, if it's $150,000 a year, that's a lot of money. And that's several teachers. So that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carly.
Next, we have Warren Pyle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, school board members, and Mr. Superintendent. I am a resident of Richfield. My name is Warren Pyle, and I'm also a member of the Save the STEM School Pool Action Committee. In just 5 short weeks, we've had unbelievable growth within the committee, and it's gained vision and focus. We've made contact with school, city, county, and state officials to get perspective. We've made contact with the Phillips Community Pool Project, and we've learned how they succeeded. We have made contact with the grant program with Hennepin Youth Sports program, and we've made an application there. We've also made contact with 3 major foundations, one being the Michael Phelps Water Safety Grant Program. The committee would like to share 3 thoughts with you tonight. First of all, vision, Reimagine Richfield, a stronger and smarter Richfield through a robust aquatics program. As we know, swimming is a total body workout. It is a lifelong activity, and swimming is a smart sport. Let's not forget the 2008 through 2010 U of M study at the Centennial Elementary entitled Smart Room, which proved that the right and left brain cognitive development increased through certain body movements. Swimming has all those movements plus much, much more. In fact, my daughter's grades improved after she began to swim seriously. She went from an average student to above average student and maintained straight A's through the middle school career. After study, we have decided that a robust aquatics program must have 2 pools, one for competition and one for instruction. The second point we'd like to make is things we know, things we don't know, and things that don't make sense. First of all, things that we do know. Raising money for the STEM school pool repairs will be difficult. But let's not forget, we put a man on the moon in 1969, and Americans can do difficult things. Things that we don't know. We really don't know how much the repair project will cost. We have one estimate at $4.5 million, but we really need 2 other estimates to legitimize the first estimate. We also have learned that we can put a vinyl liner in the pool that will greatly reduce the cost. The second thing that we don't know is, will the city help operate the pool? Or will it operate the pool and take care of operation funds? I have a meeting with the park director tomorrow at 4 p.m. and we'll find that out. Finally, things that we don't understand. We don't understand the district's pool usage figures. You can't put school hour pool usage and compare that with after school, weekend, and summer usage. And we have to remember that the pool doesn't utilize the pool, or the public doesn't utilize the pool after or during school hours. And the third point that the committee would like to make is that there's approximately 36,000 residents in Richfield, and the referendum survey only produced 650 responses. That's less than 1%. The committee feels 3 things. First of all, the referendum survey did not isolate or inform residents of the STEM pool issue. Second of all, there needs to be public education and awareness of the STEM pool issue before a decision is made. And finally, we have to remember that the STEM pool was built with public money. There needs to be a public hearing to decide its fate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pyle. And next, we have Melissa Carter.
Good evening. First, I want to apologize for the apparel choice. I was sitting outside at Donaldson in the rain watching my boys play soccer, and then I'm going to go sit in a sticky concession stand at Roosevelt. So this is what you get tonight. Again, my name is Melissa Carter, and I am here as a parent of students at STEM to discuss the pool issue. So thank you for letting me speak. What I want to speak about tonight is talking about the priorities that we have as a community defined for our programs and how we want the referendum money used, and then also alternative resources. As a starter, I am not in favor of adjusting the recommended drop-off line to save the pool, and I'll explain why. The first is that as we defined our priorities for what this referendum would be before it even got voted on, the safety around STEM drop-off was critical. I have a 5th grader who just graduated, and so I have 6 years of experience of that drop-off line, and it is dangerous. Like, there is no other way to describe it. For any of you who have not been on 12th Avenue between 70th and 72nd during drop-off time, I really recommend that you go and sit there. You have to wait till September now, but it's rough. It is your normal size city street that has parking on the east side. It is a 2-lane street, and we're supposed to do drop-off on the west side of that street. And it just is not safe. It doesn't allow for clean traffic flowing through. There is no indentation in the road like city buses get at times to make it more safe. I have had kids run in front of me and almost accidentally hit kids, even though I'm going less than 2 miles an hour. I've almost gotten hit by cars trying to come through, go around. It's not safe. And so the parents spoke, and the community spoke, because quite frankly, the residents there on 12th Avenue, they don't like it either. They don't like that traffic in the morning or in the afternoon. And that drop-off was one of the top priorities that continued to come up. I also participated in the construction meetings where we defined high-level requirements for the STEM building, and parents, teachers, PTO members, as well as Fun Club, all of us there agreed about the fact that the drop-off lane needed to be resolved. So again, just a very big priority. Secondly, it's not just the 12th Avenue piece. And I only know this because I also pick up my children, and so I will drive down Elliott and turn behind the schools. And because the drop-off is so short in the parking lot for RDLS, the cars are parked out on Elliott as well, right? So when we talk about an issue with drop-off and pickup, it's not even just the 12th. The 12th is the dangerous piece. The Elliott is the inconvenient. It just stops traffic, and we need a better solution. The second thing is we talk about our priorities and how important this drop-off is to us. The idea of diverting our money to something that was defined as the lowest priority is a serious concern for me. And the reason I say that is because we said no to things like looking at the STEM basement at all. We're not touching the STEM basement when we look at infrastructure upgrades for that school. And I don't know how it goes for the other schools, but that would be a really big disappointment if we start adding scope in when we haven't evaluated everything that's been removed. Another piece on priorities. So yes, the operating levy hopefully will get us at class sizes below 30. But as I've experienced class sizes continue to increase, it makes me really worried to create a resource that's going to have $150K operating costs on an annual basis. That's not okay. This operating levy is only for a couple of years. It's only going to keep our class sizes down for a couple of years. And so I don't want to sign up as a parent or community member to that annual fee. And then lastly, alternate resources. When we talk about what's available to us, the middle school has a pool. We have the community pool that's available during summertime. And then we also have the Edina Southdale YMCA. We do not currently live in a community that has no offerings for children to learn how to swim. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. So thank you all for coming and sharing your public comment today. We will move on to reports and information from school sources and the superintendent update.
All right, so as we have discussed when I moved a conversation about the STEM pool up to the front of the conversation, just a reminder, these are superintendent reports. So this is a conversation. However, I'm going to ask for perspectives from each board member so that we can guide our capital facilities team in their decision making. We don't specifically vote on each and every single one of the facility requests or the facility improvements, because then we would be looking at the entire project one step at a time to move forward. But I wanted to give some additional attention and background to the STEM pool, the request that was made in public comment, and then I've also held a couple of meetings to try to gather some additional information. So I'm going to do my best to summarize. There is a group that is formed calling themselves Save the STEM Pool. I met with 3 of their leaders last week. They made some specific requests. The request was to wait for a couple of years prior to making a decision in regard to the STEM pool. Support that opportunity for that group to fundraise. Support across our district, grades age 3 to 5 grades swimming across our district. Well, they follow the methodology used for the Phillips pool in Minneapolis to revitalize the pool, and so that was the request in the conversation. They made a lot of compelling arguments and shared some pretty significant justification. I think it's important for us to acknowledge some of the important pieces in regard to swimming. Swimming provides equity of access for children because not everyone can get swimming lessons outside of school, and so opportunity for our kids to have swimming lessons is obviously an equity issue. Student safety, we talked about drowning, and we talked about the importance of learning to swim, learning to be safe around pools. We also talked about it possibly being an attraction for the district, that people might select our district if this was one of the focal point areas. Talked about the environmentally positive impact of not tearing down resources and putting up parking lot or traffic flow situation, and then also talking about, and I think this was one of the significant points, is community needing more pool access. So there were some suggestions made about the busyness of our pool and the need for the community to possibly have more pool access. So I did a lot of reflection on that, and as I was reflecting, I looked through the process that we went as a district to determine priorities. And so we did do a referendum survey. There were approximately 650 people who responded to that survey. And then there were teams that came together for priority selection. And so as one of our speakers discussed tonight, there were groups of staff and community talking about what were the priorities from the survey and talking about what are the things we would include in that scope. Because as you remember, we had identified about $165 million of improvements and asked the community for about 89. And we asked for 89 because what we really wanted to do is what were the top priorities, what did we feel the things that were the most important things to ask the community for, and what were some of those things that we would like to have that we then ended up eliminating because we felt in our survey it wasn't fully supported. We've then gone to core planning teams from each site, and so each site, including RDLS and STEM and Central and the high school, have core planning teams made up again of staff and community members and parents and students, talking about what would this look like and taking the priorities and the things that we're looking at, what would it look like. And so we selected those priorities from multiple forms of input. And then we also looked at additional options for what do we do with this space beyond the top two options, which would be tearing down the pool or maintaining that space. So looking at other options for traffic flow, safety, and security, and really examining what are those best specific ideas to do. Just as a reminder, we came up with, after looking and eliminating some of the other ideas, including taking out an entire ball field, including doing nothing in that area, including leaving all of the buses on the streets, the core planning teams came up with and reviewed the top two options. Option one, which is considered the optimum opportunity, which would move all of the buses and STEM staff or staff parking to the back. It would fully separate buses from the cars and then allow the entire front of the building, which is the typical entry point, for all of our parent pickup and all of our parent drop-off. Or option two, which would have a significantly smaller area in the back, would have the students walking from the entire side of RDLS over to our STEM, and would not necessarily fit all of our buses in the most effective, efficient fashion, would still move our parent pickup and drop off to the front. Examining those two options and then really thinking about those priorities. We then also did a parking lot analysis. It was requested to see what is the overall price looked at. What would it cost to both take down the structure to create this opportunity, but then also what would happen if we separated that from the bid. So we looked at about $350,000. Now that doesn't include some additional information that's been shared, like we can look at recycling to mitigate some of those costs, saving bricks to mitigate some of those costs. But the overall taking down the structure and redoing the parking lot would be approximately $350,000. There's some additional costs if that was separated and it was waited on for 2 years. Approximately year one to separate, $77,000, $89,000 for year two. So it would cost somewhere in the range of $150,000, $160,000 to hold off to take this as a separate item. Then I also really investigated the Phillips pool and really wanted to look at if we're going to try to follow a model for the money raised for the Phillips Pool in Minneapolis, what are those peculiarities about Richfield and what are those peculiarities about the Phillips Pool? So the first piece had to do with, at the time, there was no public pool in the city of Minneapolis. And so part of, in talking to, or that was in the same way as the Phillips Pool. And so there wasn't, not in the city of Minneapolis, but in the area of the Phillips neighborhood. So it was providing a resource that just was not available to those students. And in talking to one of the major fundraisers who actually led the Phillips Pool process, he was actually unaware that we did have a second pool as a district that was open. And then also the city actually runs a city-based pool. The other piece, and we've heard a couple of those voices today, but there's some dissenting voices in this conversation. Some voices coming out of RDLS STEM that have shared communication with us today and at other times, that they may not line up in the same way, whereas in the Phillips Pool, it was made clear to me that there was all voices sort of moving that same direction. From a referendum perspective and from an overall operating perspective, as a district, I didn't feel we were prepared to fund this effort because we do have currently swimming. We are offering that at our middle school, and we've explored some ways to possibly provide additional opportunities to our students because, as we've also learned, it's actually open a reasonable amount during the school day because there are some challenges with having a public pool on school grounds. And so trying to figure out that balance between a community resource and a school-based resource. The other piece that was a significant part for Phillips that would not be something that we decided we would sign off on. So we were doing something, breaking ground actually in the very near future. We received a Hennepin County grant and we received some grants to upgrade the playground at RDLS. One of the things the Phillips group was ready to do was make that the main focus of their state and their county requests and their city requests. And so if we were to determine that we were going to try to support this, this would have to be something where we would say, well, we're going to put other request projects on hold, things like fixing the weight room, which we are looking at doing a Hennepin County grant for, fixing the locker room, which is also something we're looking at writing grants for. We'd have to go and put all of our weight and support behind a pool, and I didn't feel that that was something that we were necessarily ready to. We've also talked to the city as I was reflecting in this conversation, and at present the city has shared that they are very committed to some upgrades of infrastructure, as we know, within our streets. So for the next couple of years, the city has shared that they're going to be quite preoccupied working on the streets, working on infrastructure, and didn't feel prepared at this time to fund or support any of this particular work over the next couple of years. So as I looked at that and reflected, and again, for me, I think it's important to note that I think we do support swimming. I think that we do support having a competitive team. I think that it's important that we do have that functioning pool at RMS, and we're committed to having lessons for our students within the school day. For me, I'm recommending that we do select option one. From my perspective, I think the community was quite clear in their work on multiple occasions and multiple voices, from both the core planning teams to the priority planning teams, to the referendum survey, that safety, security, and traffic flow were one of the reasons that many of our community members worked on the referendum, and especially specifically when we look at that STEM site. So I feel like it very much looks at that referendum request. The other piece, and this is a thing that, one of the things that I think the committee, the Save the STEM Pool Committee, convinced me of is that there may be opportunity within this community for a community-based pool. But from a school's perspective, we have a pool that's actually not fully utilized during the school day because there are some complexities with safety and security of our students that if we have community members in a swimming pool at the same time as our students, there are just some challenges that we're not prepared to do, which has meant that it's sort of cut down the usage, producing about $11,280 in revenue for specifically rental. And one of the things I would want to acknowledge is that we have a very active and supportive swimming community, so that revenue is just from rental. They've also raised approximately $15,000 through their very hard efforts and have done upgrades and supported the swimming program. And they're a very strong and positive booster club with a very strong and positive impact on all of our swimming teams and all of our swimming partners. But then we also have a relatively low usage during the school day because what we do is don't have that overall overlap. So it's really not a resource as a district we would be looking at, regardless of what the community may be looking at or the community may be wanting. And so with that, I'm going to look to board members, what the core planning team and the planning teams are looking for from the board. And so they have asked for a board response of what they are in support of and what board members are in support of prior to the next steps. They are hoping to get sort of that verbal recommendation from you all prior to the end of this month. because what happens is that they will go and begin doing some architectural planning. They would like to plan on one option so that they can move forward and create plans to move forward with what the best recommendation is. And what they don't want to do is go one direction and then have to scrap those plans and start over. And so they're looking to determine, they have my recommendation is that we go with option A, which involves both the removal of that specific structure, but creating the best option for safety, security, and traffic flow. And so they're looking to board guidance on that also.
Just to be clear, do we anticipate other aspects? This is a large project with the facilities project is large and touches every one of our buildings. We don't anticipate, do we anticipate the board providing guidance on an each and every basis? You know, there's a lot of projects, and so, I mean, there were aspects the community gave input, the task forces gave input, the architects had plans that came in. I mean, we've already broadly been presented to, so to what level do they really need? I mean, I suppose out of respect for the concern that's been raised recently, but do we anticipate many more?
I don't. I think that when there's a group that is formed talking about a specific facet of this particular function, I think it's important to get specific board guidance on. I mean, for me, and again, they made a lot of compelling conversations. I think that I learned a lot about the importance of swimming within our community, swimming within our district. That said, I think it's important as a board that we also help guide that direction, to just sort of reiterate. I'm guessing there won't be too many groups formed to discuss specifically individual items.
Since I spoke, you want me to keep going?
It's your turn.
Thanks. It's my own fault. You know, out of respect for the facility study and the people who put time and effort into it, we ask a lot of the people who serve on these committees to give their very best thoughts, and they came up with a very large list. They asked that we, you know, the original dream list was about $167 million, and it got pared down to roughly half of that, with 30 of it being really boring stuff like air conditioning and air quality, which sounds boring, but is actually really important. And so, and nowhere within even the larger list was the STEM pool. And so I think there are ways we can prioritize better use of the existing pool that we have. If it's not as available now as it could be, I think there are ways we could engineer better access and better security of that building overall that would have a lower cost. You know, there's an aspect that I like. I like the excitement of, you know, could we get a $4.5 million pool or $3 million pool or whatever it happens to cost, pretty much for free, but we still have the ongoing cost of maintaining it with demand that's uncertain in terms of what, you know, is that a luxury item that we don't necessarily need, even though it would be awesome. I don't know if it's something that presents itself as a need now or in the near term. You know, the idea that it would be part of the 3-5 curriculum, I see all kinds of obstacles to that. If it were abroad, you know, for the buildings that have to bus over just to swim, we could do that right now at STEM if it were that critical. I'm sorry, at RMS if it were that critical to us. So anyway, my tendency now is to think that if there is a need and a demand for better use and better access to pools and making use of them, that we should focus our efforts on an RMS pool revitalization and expansion of the access there, and move forward with the option one that provides the best traffic flow and more parking. My 2 cents.
The previous slide had questions. In your research, was the Phillips project completely funded by outside foundations, grants?
No, there was school support, there was city support, there was a significant amount of community fundraising, there was a significant amount of corporate fundraising. There was a wide range of people pitching in towards that.
I read a story about that today because I was also wondering, and I believe the school district contributed maybe $1.75 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. The Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board, which has a massive budget, I think contributed several $1 million to it, along with some of these other groups that Steve was talking about. So the school district's share of it was relatively small to the overall budget.
What was the overall cost of that?
I think it was around $7 million.
Which, as I recall, was considerably over what they initially predicted it would cost.
Sure, but it's a different setup. I mean, I don't know if they had an existing pool already or if they had to dig it out. You know, it's
Yeah, it's
the actual total cost is different, but just the support is,
Yeah.
I think, fundamentally different.
So I guess for me, I feel like we made a commitment to the STEM families and the community to improve the safety around that area, and I think that was an important commitment, and we use that in, you know, in promoting the referendum, and I think we need to be true to what we said we were going to do with that space and with the money that the community gave to us, you know, to make all of these improvements. Although I learned a lot also in hearing a lot about this and about the swimming program, and I think one of the things that kind of caught my ear was the kind of bringing up the equity piece, and when Kanani spoke at our last meeting, that kind of resonated with me as an opportunity to maybe look for ways to work with our community ed program and partner with this swimming group that has formed to perhaps provide other opportunities for all kids to swim at a younger age. So I think if we can look to find something positive from this, I think that would be a good thing that we could work on. But I would tend to opt with option one and really staying true to our commitment to improving that as safe as it possibly can be.
So I'll give full disclosure that I am a parent who is emotionally conflicted on this issue. All of my children have benefited significantly from participating in the swimming program. I have 2 children, and we'll have 3 next year, who are benefiting from the competitive swimming program with Mr. Hamron. And I want to give complete credit right now to not only Mr. Hamron for running an outstanding program that is a real gem for our community, but also to the swim boosters, who, as Steve said, have put countless hours of their time and toil and tears, as well as dollars of their hard-earned personal funds into supporting that asset. So, you know, I think it's important to acknowledge that that is a really, really big, important gem in our community. And also acknowledging, you know, reiterating, I think, the superintendent's comments and Mr. Pyle's comments and Christine's comments about our support overall for swimming instruction and water safety, and sort of embracing this, you know, the notion that providing and encouraging equitable access, I think, is an important piece. Having said all those things, as much as I would, from an emotional perspective, love to see us have a second pool for our kids, I can't bring myself to support it, given exactly what Melissa and Carly have pointed out, in that the parent vehicle drop-off at STEM is an accident waiting to happen, and we cannot let that situation persist even for one more year, let alone 2, while we stand aside. So I think that I'm also in support of the best option for traffic management, acknowledging that this is really all about what happens on the front side of that building with getting safety for parent drop-off, and what's happening on the back side of that building is sort of a secondary effect, but that's what's needed to really support the level of activity on that campus that it currently has. And I guess that's my other challenge, again, as much as I might love to see another pool in Richfield, I really have a hard time seeing that site as the optimal site within the boundaries of our community to do that. I feel that that is a inherently limited structural site, where we're already overburdening that site with its ability to sort of handle people and people movement in the 21st century. It was designed for a mid-20th century sort of people movement, and in the 21st century it's getting stressed. So those are all the reasons that I reluctantly would support option 1.
So I have a list. First, I want to thank everyone who came today to speak in favor and against, and also to the last meeting. I always enjoy seeing community participation and seeing all the feedback and conversations going. Like my colleagues, I don't feel in good conscience I can support the pool projects right now over the safety that we are dealing with, and I have a few reasons. I was born in an island. Swimming is really important, very close to my heart. However, I have issue number one. And my son goes to STEM, so that this will benefit him, but I still understand first. We have an equity issue. I don't think I don't want to use the word fair, but we have 4 elementary schools, and I don't know that putting aside things that the community has been supporting for a couple of years now, for a pool for STEM would be the right thing to do. I think ultimately all of our students funnel into the middle school and the high school, so I would echo any efforts to make improvements to the middle school. My son actually took his first swimming lessons at the middle school as part of community education many years ago, and I know that a lot of those courses continue to be offered. There's a transparency issue. We went to voters, we knocked on doors, we shared the messaging, asking our taxpayers for money to do certain things. And the safety issue on 12 is really bad. And I don't even drop off my kid all the time or pick him up, but I've been there, and I think we all have. And this is really close to me. Where I work, Minneapolis Public Schools, I'm actually raising a lot of havoc, bringing council members and issues to resolve a safety problem at one of the sides of my school for similar reasons. And so definitely we told voters we were gonna do one thing. I acknowledge that during the surveys, a lot of the different things were not asked, right? But that's not really, but moving past that is what we did, and it's what we asked voters for. And what they're expecting is safety around those 2 schools. That's really the gist of it. So that's really why as much as I would love the idea of having all of the kids at STEM and having this, but it is not the only way for students to learn how to swim. And it's just really not equitable and transparent at the moment.
I have a question. You said that you had a conversation with the person who was leading or helping to lead the fundraising efforts for the Phillips Community Pool.
Yes.
What insights did you get from that conversation about potential philanthropic support given our community and the differences with our community and Phillips that you described?
I think that's where some of the fundraising complexities from my mind came in. I think us having a district pool and there being a city pool, he was actually unaware of those facts when I talked to him. And so he indicated that that would create some significant complexity in terms of the ability to fundraise.
Okay.
The other piece is, and it was back on my slide about the differences between us and Phillips. I think in the Phillips situation, there was a whole set between school, city, county, and state who all lined up behind the same project.
And the park board.
And the park board, okay. And again, that's one, I keep learning about the project myself. We aren't lining up in the same way. As a district, again, I have told this board pretty clearly, I don't see how I could recommend us funding this with district funds. I think you have so far echoed similar things. I think that is something different. I think the city can't quite line up behind it at this point. I think we can't put all of our eggs into that particular fundraising basket from a county and state perspective. And so I think there were a lot of benefits and a lot of hard work. And while I'm very convinced this group would put in the hard work, I think there are some factors where there's not the benefits that were the same case.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Because I do appreciate the desire to try to raise the funds and how much work that takes and the amount of time that goes into it. So thought that was important to ask. I think one of the things that feels consistent across all of us that have spoken thus far is just the acknowledgement that we would likely be having a very different conversation if we did not have an existing pool within our district, if we did not have the existing seasonal pool within our community. And that, as you said, leads to a very different reality for the funding picture in and of itself. But I think also the profound safety needs that ever since I have been on the board, and I'm sure for many years prior, we have been hearing about and we have said that we are committed to acting on. And that, to me, I feel like is one of our primary responsibilities to our community and to our kids and to families and also to the neighbors of the STEM and RDLS schools. So I think that, to me, just feels like it makes it a very different situation. To go to one of the comments that was shared, though, is I fully share, and I think all of us do, the desire to have a robust aquatics program and to be thinking about how to address and take action on some of the really important needs that have been raised within our existing facilities. And so thinking about how to charge our community education department and our athletics department with really, I would say, looking at how is that space currently used or not used, what are the barriers to access and participation, whether it is cost, whether it is hours, whether there are cultural differences that I think we need to be taking into consideration in terms of offering time where it is available for single-sex usage, for example. I just think there's a wealth of questions that we should be asking, and I really would like to know more about how we can address that, in particular within the building that is in our control, which is the RMS pool. In the interest of time and not repeating all of the other things that have been said that I agree with, I would echo fellow board members in saying that while personally conflicted and understanding that this is an asset that we have, it is not one that I think is in our financial best interest to invest in at this moment.
Okay.
You want me to comment? Okay.
Yeah, would you like to?
I think, just echoing what Crystal said, rather than hash everything over again, much like Pete, I'm conflicted. I use the pool during the school year 3 times a week for fitness. And through that, I become fairly close with Mark Cameron, and I understand where he's coming from. But again, in terms of financing and the commitment to the larger community with safety issues, unless we are guaranteed that $4 million is all of a sudden going to appear, I would have to agree with the others on staff here, or on the board here.
All right, so I appreciate the thoughts and I appreciate the guidance and I appreciate all the learning from this situation. I will give that guidance to the core planning team as they continue on moving forward with their capital facility work. With that, we are going to transition forward towards superintendent goals and begin having a conversation or just the final update. And we've gone through most of these in depth, so we're just going to do a relatively quick update. So just as a reminder, we have achievement goals, process goals, and evaluation goals. And so again, most of this has been presented earlier. One of the goals was in regard to increasing our graduation rate by 3% or more. We got partial growth in that area, noting that the calculation methodology of the state changed, but our district increased from 74.8 to 75.74. And then in the previous presentation, our disaggregated data suggested continuing closing the gap between our lowest and highest students, as our Latino, African American, and a wide range of our students have accelerated past the state average and made large gains in their graduation rates. Then similarly, while we don't have MCA reading and math, we do have some early indicators, and those early indicators would suggest that as we look to again, continue to grow in overall math proficiency by 3 points or more in overall reading. Our early indicators are indicating that those goals won't be met, but that we do also are looking at likely stagnant to minor regression in our scores. But overall, our disaggregated data similarly matches our work in regard to graduation rates, suggesting a continuing closing of the gap. And one of the things the board had asked to report on demographically would be the disaggregated gains between our lowest and highest achieving students, really closing that gap and making sure all students have great opportunity. One of the things I had the benefit to see, and one of the things the board had asked, was for us to do some more reporting of that, and we have some vision cards that we'll be doing in the future, which really play those out, disaggregating with reports that'll be starting in the fall on a regular basis. One of the things I had the benefit of doing was being at the Centennial Awards ceremony, which kind of highlights some of the work that we're doing between our highest and lowest students, and also some of the ways we're celebrating some of the achievements. So here's a video from Centennial Elementary.
Broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round. You can't find a fighter.
So Centennial had an awards celebration really focusing on students that celebrated their growth.
Mountains, we gon' walk it out and mountains. And I'll rise like the day. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, I like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. The silence is in quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Mountains, bring it to its feet. Mountains, and I'll rise up. I'll rise like the day. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. All we need is hope, and for that we have each other, and for that we have each other. And we will rise, so we'll rise. I'll rise up, rise like the day. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I will rise 1,000 times again. And we'll rise up, I like the waves. We'll rise up, in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again.
So that video was debuted at the Centennial Award ceremony last week. And obviously, as you watch that, you just keep thinking, it's just group after group after group of kids who made incredible gains. And as you think about Centennial Elementary, just as a point of fact, it's our highest poverty school. It is our most diverse school. And as we look at really closing the gap between our highest and lowest achieving students, it's schools like Centennial who are moving towards the type of things that statewide get recognized as beating the odds. And it hasn't been named in that way, but some of the results that they are getting with students are beginning to move that school in that direction. And they're pretty exciting for us as we look at our gains in all kinds of different ways as the board has pushed to really look at how do we disaggregate our data to see areas where we're closing the gap and areas where students are getting large growth beyond just the overall. From there, we also look at some of the things we did from a process perspective, and these were the large pieces that we were doing from a strategic perspective. So it doesn't seem like it was just this year, but back in the fall, we launched a 7-period day at the high school and middle school, and some of our neighboring districts, as we know, are reducing to 6-period days, but we launched that providing some extra supports to our students. I developed vision cards, and vision cards are a way for us to systematically report back disaggregated results across a wide range of areas beyond just test scores, but how are we doing on surveys? How are we doing on behavior and attendance? We shared the drafts of those at a recent board meeting. We'll begin the reporting mechanism starting with our overall achievement vision card when our MCA scores are allowed to be launched out in August. We led referendum communication. Again, seems like it was a long time ago, but we really worked hard to communicate out information, passing a $450 per student increase to support our class size reduction, and then also the capital facility conversation that we've had. We launched and supported the new leadership at STEM, knowing that they had a transition of leaders and really making sure that they felt supported and are able to grow and blossom in their leadership journey. We really expanded staff evaluation efforts. So as we noted, there are staff who were non-licensed who had not been evaluated, and there were not evaluations. So there are now evaluations of all of our staff members, and so we continue on to make those efforts and are making sure that all of our staff are fully evaluated. We've reviewed our curriculum, and we've looked to make sure that we have a more aligned to standard curriculum, but also that's going to be more representative of the students that are in our seats. And so there are a lot of launches that are beginning next fall with new curriculum that you'll hear about later. We presented budget info and a transparent budget process to all of our sites and also our PTOs across all of our schools. And then we also led Reimagine Richfield efforts to really gain voice across our system of our students, staff, and our community. And then areas that were in my personal evaluation. Survey data. So as a reminder, one of the things we wanted to do was look at survey representation. And so we had a large survey in February, showed significant growth across all areas from a perception perspective of our district, and then also from a superintendent performance perspective. We worked to have our leaders increasing their participation in activities. And so leaders were creating an expectation on their calendars to be at a wide range of activities. Including one of the things that we did was Reimagine meetings held, which led to the final culminating meeting we'll talk about, and then a superintendent advisory, which is launched at our last piece, was scheduled for regular meetings set up for 18-19, and we'll do a lot of broad-based communication about the dates that are going on with that. And then also we created a calendar that was systemic across all of our district, so we had fewer conflicts of all our events, and it was maintained, published, and sent out to our community. Those things that we really wanted to look towards. One of the things we will do in our closed session is talk about my evaluation, but then also look specifically at some of the goals. So my evaluation will go over the next month or so with the goal of having finalized goals for next year to be able to share with the community in September or August at the launch of our school year. But some of the things we've worked on is a superintendent advisory aligned to our strategic plan in Reimagine Richfield, and so we've already set that up. We'll talk a little bit about some of the main topics, and we have dates that we've already shared out, but again, we'll do some broad-based sharing of those dates in the fall. We'll be having an athletics extracurricular advisory launch. So one of the things we learned, as we learned on our surveys, is people are looking for more strength within our extracurricular and advisory work. And so we have done the preliminary work to launch an advisory, which will be led by me and the athletic director. But launching an advisory to really get that voice of both community and sports-based and district-based sports and extracurricular activities. Continuing our Reimagine Richfield efforts. We got some statewide recognition for the work we've been doing in Reimagine Richfield, gathering voice of our students and community, and we've heard some broad-based voice and wanted to continue and deepen those efforts. We have a pretty significant curricular overhaul. So as we've been talking about changing our curriculum to fully align to standards and also represent more of the students in our seats, we're doing some significant steps forward in curriculum. As our board guidance and our work at our strategic plan, the goal is to have Innocent Classroom and full staff equity training completed by the end of next year, and so that will be one of my goals. Then continuing to, and these are some of the things that were looked at from our Reimagine Richfield, but then also things that have been our areas of focus. Deepening and improving district climate and culture of trust and respect, making sure that we have that trust and respect across students, staff, and all throughout our community. Working to launch marketing and pride campaigns to get more school spirit and more district spirit as we also make sure that we are marketing with one message and one voice. And then obviously, as we talked about a little bit earlier, ongoing facility work and improvements as we continue with the core planning teams towards the first large launch of work that'll happen beginning in December as we break ground at the high school and continue on there with STEM and Central. So again, we'll talk more about those goals and refine them further, but those are the ones that, based on current feedback from the board, current input from the community, that is where things look to be focused, with some refining coming in the future. Questions from the board?
I have a question about the vision cards, because I don't think we have seen a final product of that. Can you share when we can expect to see that?
I can share it tomorrow on
Okay.
email. I have them.
Great.
And then we can also present them as a group in July with a reporting schedule that'll also go along with that for reporting for next year.
That would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And then my one other, it's more of a comment, and I know it is going to feel nitpicky, but I personally feel like it's important, which is why I'm saying it. I think the sort of language and the next steps slide around full staff equity training complete, I think actually sends a confusing signal, because I know the intention is that indicates that staff would have all gone through Innocent Classroom, which to me is very different from full staff equity training being complete, because I don't think, one, it's ever completed, and two, I think we should constantly be thinking about how are we building and building new offerings and new opportunities into equity work for our staff. So just the way that was phrased sort of threw me, and so I wanted to make sure that I commented on it.
That would be a good clarification. Yes, the intention was, and the board has made it clear, and we have made it clear administratively, is that Innocent Classroom first round training would be complete by the end of this year, or this next year. We are engaging in a wide range of additional things, working with the Minnesota Humanities Center, and we'll be sending a large group of staff next week. And we're actually doing a wide range of equity training. And so yes, acknowledge that it's not saying equity training is ever complete, or any of the training we do is. It's completing that first round of Innocent Classroom as we've rolled out to make it systemic across our district. So thank you.
You look like you're about to say something.
I was on the verge. So, I mean, as far as the next steps, and I understand this is draft form, obviously, as we'll move forward with 18-19 goals, we'll work around putting in measurable metrics, and curricular overhaul is one where I guess I'm having a challenge understanding exactly how that can be measured, but I'm sure there's a way that I'm just not aware of. So at any rate, but the other thing is I'm just impressed with how well you read my mind about launching an athletics extracurricular advisory. So good telepathy on that one.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Just for clarification, and curricular overhaul is another area where there is further information in relation to that. There was some board questions in regard to budget, and I was thinking of those things as we were talking about that. So we are rolling out and have worked together with our initiative committee to make sure we're doing things effectively. We have some training for a full readers workshop and reading training using Lucy Calkins materials, and then also level libraries in every classroom that are widely diverse, and getting some standardized text into the hands of all of our kids that are more representative, and that'll be K-5. And then we're also looking at some 6-12 math transformation into moving our curriculum in 6-12. But as we continue on, we will have some reports back to the board on some of the things that we're doing in terms of those pieces. All right, and then just as a reminder, obviously we'll talk more about that during the closed session. There will be refining and putting some metrics to that also. One of the things we do talk about there is Reimagine Richfield, and so we have a review and summary just to share and remind the board and the community of some of the things that we are and continue to be doing. So just as a reminder, as we began Reimagining Richfield, it began with a powerful question: how can we shape our educational system in Richfield to allow us the opportunity to achieve our dreams? That was not an adult question, but that was the question that came from our students as we began with a full high school Reimagine event. And we were the first high school in the state of Minnesota to functionally use all of their students. And just as a reminder, we had thought initially 20 kids, 30 kids, 60 kids. Our students, including Gabe, Matthew, Millie, Destiny, Diego, Alejandro, and a wide range of other students, were very insistent. Any Reimagine work gathering student voice had to have every single possible student voice. And so as a reminder, in December, we had all of our students participate in Reimagine Richfield. Then we followed that up because we also wanted to have an event for our entire community. We brought the community in, and we also had a staff event to make sure that our staff were able to share their voice. Based on that, we had, and just as a reminder, here are some more of those details from Reimagine Richfield. So we also worked with Forbes Consulting that brought in a wide range of skills and strategies to gather student voice. And so just as a background, it comes out of Reimagine Minnesota, a statewide effort across all of the districts in the state and a wide range of superintendents participating with their students. Student conference of over 300. You also can see behind the board, just underneath the whiteboard, one of the posters. And that is the poster that was created by us in Richfield. But on the board, or on the projector, you see some of the information from Reimagine Richfield and Reimagine Minnesota.
Very small font.
Yes, in very small font, but right behind Mr. Tensing, there is a wide-ranging, larger poster that's actually that same poster, I believe, in a much larger way. And so all of this, yes, is in small font. This was brought to us by Paul of Forbes Consulting. And so what they did as a convening model is they used what's called open space technology, which really is about continuing to gather student voice and allowing them to determine the conversation, to determine the questions, and to determine what we talk about. And so our students got together throughout the course of the day, creating conversations for themselves and making sure that they were there to share the top priorities and the things that they wanted to make sure that we worked on. And then we used those same strategies and then moved over to a World Cafe as we worked with some of our adults. What that really did was come up with a set of actions based on the top priorities, but then also looked at our strategic plan to make sure that some of the things that we were bringing forward were really aligned to some of the work we're trying to do as a district. So some of the things we did pretty quickly is we changed menus based on our student input, because there was some food comments, and when you ask students for input, they're going to give you a wide range of pieces. And we actually added some extra Spanish supports to our dual language program. Based on their concerns about school pride and our sports and their competitiveness, we began to work to set up a change of conference to the Tri-Metro and Twin Cities football for 1920, things we'll talk about later. We continue to improve our band and focus on our music program, which actually has now received multiple awards, including dual platinum at their latest competition. And then also really expanded and realigned our supports to help students succeed in rigorous classrooms, making some semester 1 to semester 2 changes at our high school to make sure that all of our kids were supported in achieving their goals. And then as we look at some of the things that they really focused on for next year, and I mentioned these briefly just a couple minutes ago, launching the new K-5 literacy curriculum to really reflect our students more effectively, and a new 6-12 math curriculum to raise rigor across math. Finalizing training of all staff first round through, better wording, and instant classroom. Minnesota Humanities Center, and there was a lot of conversation about culturally relevant teaching. We actually have staff from across our buildings going to be trained at the Minnesota Humanities Center with the expectation that they bring that back, share it with staff, and help train other staff members in equity. We're beginning facility renovations this summer and obviously have large-scale facility upgrades, including the highly concerning from the student's perspective, bathrooms at the high school, Central Education Center, and also STEM starting in 2018. One of the areas that they really pointed out had to do with social, emotional, and mental health supports. So we added those supports to every building for 18-19, including somebody working to coordinate across the district, a mental health social worker at our middle school, but then also paraprofessionals supporting mental health and social emotional well-being in every single building. Reduced class sizes, because one of the things that they had specifically talked about, and this also supported our referendum work, is reducing class sizes for 18-19. Our technology group, because there were concerns about wanting more technology, has accelerated their plan to roll out one-to-one technology and get more computers in the hands of our students. And then also really work to improve the master schedule to make sure the classes students want what the classes students got. And that we're really working to make sure that there are aligned supports to those accelerated classes at our high school. And then based on our last meeting in terms of Reimagine Richfield, really setting the agenda for our first set of Superintendent Strategic Advisory Group for next year, which will be meeting 5 times throughout the year. One of the top priorities is really looking at how do we and what steps should we take to improve climate and culture of trust and respect between students and adults, between students, adults, and our community, and all across the Richfield community. Looking at improving our curriculum to align to our individual student needs and backgrounds, because our students really identified that they wanted to be individually challenged with things that reflected them, but also challenged them on an individual basis. And then looking at ways to expand school and district pride, things beyond just our marketing and our branding, things beyond being in different conferences, but also figuring out ways to make sure that our students are proud and excited to be members of our Richfield Spartan community. Similar next steps. So we're planning to continue with additional Reimagine Richfield events in 18-19 and gather input from our students, our staff, and our community. But then also using that Superintendent Strategic Advisory Group to help focus on the priorities that are identified, and then obviously implementing those improvements and reporting them back. So with that, other questions or comments or thoughts about Reimagine Richfield?
I think one thing that I would like to see improvements in and just more of a focus in as we move into this next year is the sort of communication loops around different conversations that are being had and sort of how much time might pass, because there are things in this that happened months ago that I feel like I'm just hearing about or seeing about for the first time. And I think, you know, what we're striving to be is more nimble, to be more responsive, and I think that is just going to require a different level of skill with respect to communication, which I know does align to investments that we are making in the budget for next year. So I'm just trying to draw those connections and sort of say that is something that I hope we'll be able to be quicker and more responsive with. And I think making sure that we're touching on then what are some of the next layers of things that have been raised. And this connects to one of the things that I'm going to share towards the end of the meeting. But, you know, how to make stronger connections with trade programs and different pathways that exist for students after high school, and thinking about some of the opportunities that actually do currently exist for our students that maybe we're just not making strong enough connections to. And so I say that because I know that was one of the big things that came up in the large community meeting in January across a lot of different groups. So I am excited about progress that has been made in this sort of first year, and just want to challenge us to be responsive, to be sort of tight in our communication, and really make really strong connections between things that are being raised and work that we are doing, opportunities that we are pursuing as a district.
Yeah, I think we learned a lot in our first year in
Yes,
Reimagine Richfield.
absolutely.
And one of the complexities, as we were doing a lot of also train the trainer, as we learned how to convene these ourselves, is it was highly complex to work with Paula Forbes, who is a great partner, but is obviously in high demand,
Yeah.
but then also learning what is it like to have the students own the message and own the information, and trying to figure out how to do that balance with that work. So definitely knowing that I also shared wow, I want to move faster on some of this, wow, I want to get the information out faster, I want to be responsive quicker, but then also not feeling fully empowered to move and, I'd say, adultify the student situation and push those things forward. However, now that we are looking at ourselves being some of the main leaders of some of the work, we are looking at being able to do things and respond quicker. And then as you also point out, working with communications and expanding our work in that area to deepen that should also provide some strength and some benefits.
One quick thing, and then I know Christina has something she wants to say too. I completely agree with not adultifying, I don't even know if that's a word, the student-driven part of this, but I think, you know, a ton of community members turned out one night in January. and there was the teacher effort that took place. It looks like maybe towards the end of February, and I think those are pieces that I think we should think about it as a holistic approach, but also think about it as separate pieces that we can be responding in different ways and at different speeds with.
Yep.
And then I guess my addition was the communication, even more than communication back to us, but communication back to the students. I feel like they put all that effort in, and if we want to do this next year and to continue this effort, if they don't feel like they've been heard and things have been done, they're going to be less motivated to continue putting that effort forth. So I think making sure that when we, even if it's a small thing like the lunch changes, although that is a big thing, but even something like that, to make sure that that information gets back to all of them, that this was because of information we got from you.
So that would be an area that I would suggest actually was an area of strength. We actually did have the student ambassadors. They did report back to the students. Even though it's not a word I'm going to use it again, we were very careful not to adultify that. But student leaders like Matthew Kiflu actually did report back to the entire student body some of the steps that we had done, and on 2 different occasions, I believe Gabriel also helped with that, made sure that they were sharing that information back. And so while we didn't necessarily, or as we look to expand and deepen those efforts, that was an area where our student leaders really stepped forward. And I'm excited for Diego, who is our new student council president, and he was one of our leaders of this work. He's excited to continue that work and continue the work reporting things back and continuing.
That touches squarely on one of my great hopes for this work, is that as important as the adult voices are in this conversation, the student voices are the most important voices in this conversation, because the role of the adults is to serve the students. And any adult intake that we're receiving needs to be funneled around how does that support students. So the student voices are primary. And I was particularly encouraged by the response that our students gave. It far surpassed our expectations. And I'm really encouraged to know that we are, my hope would be that this work is just a seed for ongoing, continual, and expanded empowerment of student government, student leadership, and so that we can really sort of grow that particular asset. Because I think what we learned is it's a tremendous asset that we have here, an untapped asset for kind of revitalizing and transforming our district.
All right, if there's anything else, we'll move on to a conference update. And so as we talk about and think about school pride, one of the pieces we've talked about is realigning ourselves into a conference or conferences that allow our sports team to continue to be focused upon, but also puts us on a level with districts of, I'd say, more equal footing. And so what we did is we investigated opportunities to participate in conferences where we had been looking for schools to play sports against, schools that might not have been in our conference, where we find those equal values as teams, equal values as schools, and trying to put on more equitable competition levels. From a football perspective, one of the things we learned is that these are 1.5 to 2 year long processes. And so changing conferences and having those be implemented in 18-19 isn't feasible. However, I'm excited and pleased to share that we were looking for membership in the Twin Cities Conference, which has 28 members and allows us to be playing schools of our size, of our similar demographics and similar size sports teams. So we're looking at 2019-20. We've been confirmed membership in the Twin Cities Conference with 28 members and a wide range of schools teams. And then for our other athletics and extracurriculars, we have been just actually received information that we are allowed entrance into the Tri-Metro Conference for 19-20. And you'll notice some teams that we play a lot of sports with already: Academy of Holy Angels, Brooklyn Center, Fridley, St. Anthony. Those are teams that we have often played with. outside of our conference, and teams that they actually expressed an interest in us joining their conference, and we actually expressed an interest in that mutual relationship. As we did this work, we also learned that if there are areas where the conference doesn't have fully competitive teams, we have a couple of options. One, the Metro West is willing and able to keep us in for sports that are not fully competing in that conference. But then also we have some strength and could offer our partners, and our partners have some strength that they could offer us in collaborative teams to play sports outside of those conferences. Things that we already do in regard to girls hockey with Academy of Holy Angels or our trap team, and other things that we can look at where we have, for example, a very strong Nordic ski team, and some of those other schools might want to join us in a collaborative effort in that way. And so we look forward to those conference changes to be implemented in 1920.
So I want to definitely give a shout out to David Boy for this work. As a parent of a ninth grader who plays football, I'm very pleased with the outcome that Dave has accomplished, and I know it was not necessarily a given that things would align that way. But I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I was very pleased, and Mr. Boy and I partnered to present actually just last week to the Tri-Metro Conference, to their committee to talk about joining. And some of the things that they reflected back were very exciting to us, as we and joining them was very exciting to them. One, they look at our facilities with the multitude of gyms that we have, with a full-size swimming pool. They're very excited by those options. They're excited by the idea of us hosting some of the conference-wide or city-wide events. Some things that we've actually done. We've actually hosted the Tri-Metro Swim Invitational for the last couple of years. And then they're also excited and interested in hosting us for some of those pieces. And so it's just really neat to see back and forth just that mutual excitement and some of the things we each have as assets and resources. But then also sort of that equal ground of footing. And how you tell if you are in the correct type of conferences is if you have an okay team, you should have the equal number of wins and losses. You should be a 500 team. When you have a very good team, you might have a chance of winning. When you have a very poor team, you might have a chance of losing or being at the bottom of the conference. And we think that this conference opportunity gives us a chance to, on a typical basis, be right in the competition and have chances to rise when we're competitively successable, and when we field weaker teams, obviously still land in the same.
And the alignment with the Reimagine work here, again. Our athletics program, we know fundamentally is about participation, about making opportunities for kids to participate and to grow from that athletics experience. And one piece of feedback that we heard from students was it was hard for students to see themselves going out for teams when they felt like they had no chance, that they were just going to be beat up on. And so I think this is really a win for us to be presenting to our students. Hey, come out and play sports, get all those perks and benefits of the growth you can get from the athletic participation, and we'll stand a chance to be competing. So.
Right. I think Mr. Boy shared the data where over half of our teams finished last in their conference. About a third of the teams then finished second to last, and the others finished third to last. And so at our current competitive rates, we're not overly competitive. And while we don't assume, again, as you point out, our point is for students to participate, to engage in extracurricular activities, to engage in athletics. We certainly do not assume that we are going to go in and be winning conference titles in all of our sports by any stretch of the imagination, as we've actually played many of these teams, and we have back and forth wins and losses with them on equal footing. But it is that great opportunity to grow pride as games become more and more competitive. And those are exciting challenges for our students and for our community.
Not to throw cold water on the Tri-Metro, but I couldn't help but notice transportation is going to be a real pain.
So it's an interesting question. So we did some analyses of mileage and then also estimated minutes, and they're actually relatively similar. That
mileage and estimated distance is fine, but you're not going through downtown Minneapolis to get there.
Right. So
I mean,
most
you had
of
Bloomington Kennedy, you had St. Louis Park, you had Cooper. They're all on the west side, but all of these schools are north and east of Minneapolis, and it's going to be a real problem.
So that is absolutely true. There are some of the schools. I would argue there are 3 or 4 schools that aren't. Academy of Holy Angels, there's Visitation, there's St. Croix Lutheran, and actually with Fridley you would go around the outside. But yes, we lose some of the very close ones like Bloomington Jefferson and Bloomington Kennedy. But in our analysis, it will be very similar to the drive to Chaska, the drive to Chanhassen, and some of those schools that we have been driving out to also. And so there are some areas where transportation could provide some challenges, and we'll have to figure that out.
Yep. And then right, in football, we're talking about urban.
Yeah.
The Minneapolis
Yes.
and St. Paul urban core.
Correct.
So yeah.
Correct.
Just one quick question. At this point, this would not affect our current partnership around the boys hockey team. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. If that is all, we will move on to commendations.
All right, so Sheridan Hills art teacher Nicole Camholz and her second grade students received a letter from soldiers for their service for Memorial Day cards that they sent off. And so my name is Master at Arms Charles DeGidio with the U.S. Navy. Charles DeGidio writes that I am currently serving in the Middle East and received your artwork from Jen Gaffney, one of our students, and there are artwork from many of the students. I've been distributing these pieces to our different sections over the last several days. I'm ready to thank you for including these unique pictures into your class schedule. I opened the Sheridan Hills website and saw that you received some of the pictures that I sent of a handful of sailors receiving the cards and pictures. They were really a hit. All of them are very special. We've been talking about how great it was to see the different ways that the students expressed their gratitude for our service. What really made a positive impact was the diversity in the drawings. Our group is comprised of individual augmentees that are plucked from units around the country. Only 3 of us from the 160 are from Minnesota, and much like the city of Richfield, the Navy has people from all around the world who are serving our great country. It is part of what makes both the Richfield and the Navy so great. Each little message from your students is so powerful and inspiring. They remind many of us how we felt about the military when we were 7 and 8 years old. Your gesture has made us feel a little closer to home. Thank you very much. It really makes a difference. We are very grateful, and please let me know if there's anything I can do for you. Very respectfully, Master at Arms DeGidio Charles, U.S. Navy. So those pictures are actually on our district and the Sheridan Hills website, and there's some pretty amazing pictures of our military members holding cards from our students.
Yeah.
Cool.
Second, we got a commendation from the Richfield Police Department from social worker Marissa Zimmerman. Another great year in experience partnering with the Richfield Police Department to provide 11 Richfield High School students with bikes, helmets, and locks. What a special opportunity to build relationships, learn new skills, and offer students a safe way to get to and from school and work. Thanks, Richfield PD.
Okay, thank you. So we will move on to the consent agenda.
I will move the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Mr. Tensing, a second by Mr. Ashmead. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the consent agenda passes. So we will move on to old business and the 2018-2019 budget with Mr. Holge.
Great, thank you. I have for your approval tonight the 2018-19 budget for next year. That includes $90,762,893 in revenue, of which about $67 million is general fund. It includes $113 million of expenditures, of which $66 million is in the general fund. Just a quick note, obviously there is excess spending in that category. That really ties back into the construction budget for which we bonded last year and are able to spend that money over the next few years. So we'll go through some of the previews and things like that. I have a few changes to the PowerPoint that's in the packet based on some feedback and questions that we received from board members over the weekend as well as today. So I've made some of those adjustments. I'll try to include as many of those answers in here and kind of cover those pieces as well. But if there are other questions, we can continue to follow those as well. Just quickly moving forward, we'll do a brief overview, talk about the revenues and expenditures separately, and then drill down and talk about what the impact on the fund balance is for the end of that year. When we start looking at the overview of the general fund specifically, we see $67 million in revenue, up from $63 million this year. You can see most of that is falling within that property taxes component. There are really 3 different components part of that. One is the obviously voter approved operating referendum of over $1.8 million. The other component of that is technology levy, which is based on a tax capacity of the district, and we're seeing that tax capacity increasing. And the other thing that we talked about in the levy certification, but a number of questions have come up once taxpayer bills started coming out and what those invoices were, it seemed to be different than those. What we actually had, and this is a good example of the property taxes from 2017 actually went down this year because of some negative adjustments, even though we had tax capacities and things like that increasing. So if you remember a few years ago, we had a significant enrollment reduction from what we had anticipated, so we had levied for that, but those adjustments hit our levy certification for this current year. So property taxes went down, and now we're going back up to even out to that enrollment projection, but then also with the additional revenue tied in with that operating referendum, as well as the property, as well as the construction projects tied in with that. So that's, I know, one of the questions that have come up, and that's where that went up so significantly beyond just 1.8 million. Also, you can see the federal and the revenue went up. We're anticipating using some additional federal grants for our special education programming this year. Looking at expenditures, you can see really kind of four large categories: salaries and wages and employee benefits. These are tied obviously with contract settlements and things like that, but more significantly, this is tied in with those additions of programs and positions that were part of that operating referendum, where we're adding funds to reduce target class sizes and do some things like that. And that's impacting both those assumptions around salaries and wages, as well as the employee benefits. We also have supplies. One of the things within the special education budget, there were a number of different services and programs that were built in, and it was line itemed into a holding item within the supplies. So about $600,000 of the supplies is kind of a holding until we have specific expenditures within the specific disability categories. And a number of those dollars will either turn into tuition-based services to other districts, or perhaps some additional into the salaries and wages. And then finally, equipment. Two significant areas here that we've seen some increases. One was tied in with our long-term facilities, equipment purchases and things like that. And then also the technology equipment is another purchase that is sitting within that equipment purchase piece. Moving on to the overview of the general fund, again by program series, and we're going to do a deeper dive into this a little bit later, so I'm just going to move on to it. But these are kind of the number of different categories when we look at kind of the different parts of the organization and the operations that fall into that program series. Again, this is all general fund, and again, the same piece of $66,887,000 in expenditures tied in with that. Then we look at a number of our other funds. These obviously are much smaller than that $66 million component of it. It includes food service, community education, construction, which you can see is that large revised budget for this year, and then revenue coming in next year, and then the expenditures tied in with that for next year. Debt service is the service on our debt associated with those building bonds, as well as other bonds that we have issued. The OPEB Debt Service Trust, Internal Service Fund, which is our self-funded insurance programs, both Funds 20 and 21, which is our medical benefits as well as our dental benefits, and then the OPEB Trust components, which is the servicing of that OPEB debt service. And then the expenditures tied in with that. A couple just kind of key items to kind of highlight in this category. Community education, you can see that there is a rather large reduction from our current revised budget in revenue for next year. I know this question came up in the preliminary discussion. That $2 million includes revenue that was in reserve accounts, that when we separated our community education program from Bloomington, we received those reserve accounts now sitting in the Richfield account. So there is a large expenditure tied in with that of about $300,000 to $400,000 in reserves that moved over. Obviously, that doesn't realize as revenue, but realizes as resources that we can use for the community education program, but that's the reason for that decline. And then community education also, you can see, is projecting expenditures of $1.8 million with the $1.7 million in budget. That really is intentional reserve spending associated with that, primarily within the one of the early childhood programs to help support that program development and getting it up and running. So relatively small, but it's intentional, knowing that we had some reserves that had moved over from Bloomington instead of sitting on it. It helped provide the programming for the current year. Just kind of a quick highlight of that information. Total revenue is $90,762,000. That's a decrease of $111 million from the revised FY18. That is that construction bond component of it that was realized in revenue in current year. and then is obviously not realized again next year. General fund has $67 million in revenue. That's an increase of $4.3 million from FY18. And we talked about just kind of those primary changes around property tax increases, or the levy increase, the approved referendums, the tax capacity, and then those current year levy adjustments that were made that were reductions are now moving back up to a baseline. The increase in federal grants, special education, as well as the bond refunding and those other funds is a reflection of we've had bond reissues over the last 2 years, and so we realized additional revenue over those 2 years because of the refunding, and then the expenditures played out over those following 2 years, and so now we're coming close to kind of cleaning that up as we move forward. When we look at expenditures, again, $113,938,000 in expenditures, an increase of $25,968,000 from revised FY18. As I said earlier, that's in that construction bond project component of it, and so we realized the money last year. Now we're starting to spend it. In the general fund, we have $66,887,000, of which $4.6 million, which is a $4.6 million increase from the revised FY18. And increases, as we talked about, were in salaries and wages, purchase services, supplies, construction, regular instruction support services, special education, instructional support, and pupil support services were the programs that were most specifically impacted by that. Again, just highlighting that information about the community education revenue is projected to be down because of the end of year reserve payments that were made, and then using some of that program for schooling readiness, and then the debt service accounting for the bond refundings. When we look at the additional expenditures that are playing in and kind of our commitment to the community, this really kind of highlights where we are using that additional money. One of the things that really came out as primary when we were doing all of our surveys as far as what our community was wanting, what our parents were wanting, it really tied in with class size reduction and target class size reduction. We have currently allocated 13.2 FTE to reduce target class sizes by an average of 2 students across the district, plus additional reductions in kindergarten and first grade. And we have some reserves that are put into place with our contingency. So as we look at middle school or high school, if there are specific courses that have larger enrollments than what we would desire, we have some opportunity to make some adjustments in those. I have a couple slides following up here that will try to explain what that means. It's hard to put that in layman's terms because it's not necessarily 2 students in every class are going to be less. We have simply 1 teacher at a grade level in a building can cause a swing of 6 to 8 students in that classroom. So a 26 ends up going down to 18, which is, we don't have a way to reduce that as a whole by 2 students in every classroom, but it helps bring everybody in line. And we'll show that in a little bit. Additional staffing in all buildings to support social and emotional learning. This is really blended between special education funding, so that's one of the increases we'll see in special education, as well as regular education funding from the referendum to help support that. One of the other things we talked about in the referendum was a commitment to additional course offerings. And when we started this, we had moved preliminarily or kind of early into our 7-period day at the high school because we knew it was right. We didn't have the funds to sustain it and didn't believe it was sustainable, and so that was one of the asks, was in order to be able to maintain those course offering options at the high school, we needed the referendum, and so maintaining that 7-period day is something that referendum has allowed us to do, as well as the fund balance increase to provide moderate sustainability for the program additions. And what we've done is we've built in a modest increase in our fund balance for next year, hoping to sustain our commitment for 3 to 4 years. Obviously with the information that we know right now, but that's one of the other commitments that we had seen and heard from our community as well. Other additions, an addition of a social worker at Richfield Middle School, and one of the other things that we've kind of heard throughout time is the need to be out and tell our story a little bit more. So increasing communications programming using a realignment of funds and excess revenue from the current year and future budget projections. What that means is we're anticipating adding a position to serve as a communications role across the district, and then have also increased that budget by about $50,000 on top of that to provide for the additional resources and publications that would be necessary. So a rather modest investment in that, but something to help tell our story and tell about the great things that are happening within the district. We want to be clear that that really is coming out of some of the other reserves that we've been able to build out over the last couple of years, and isn't a priority with that referendum funding, but our increasing reserve and realignment of resources has allowed us to do some of that. So this is my attempt at kind of trying to show you what's behind the scenes and kind of a transparency around how we look at class sizes and how we make some assumptions. And we shared this information at Fiscal Planning Advisory Committee at one of the meetings, and it's hard to take a look at. But on the right is based on an old calculation or what our previous calculation was for target class sizes, looking at target class sizes at Centennial of 24 students and class sizes at the other elementaries at 26, and bringing that down to a target class size at Centennial of 22 and a target class size of elementary at 24 at the other buildings. So that's that 2 student reduction. What we see is that when we run it, we show here's what the calculation is on a percentage. You can see to get to that true number, it's fractions of positions and really is going to be varying between 2 and 4 depending on the position. With that, we then round to the sections so that we don't have 2.95 of a teacher sitting someplace or 2.71 of a teacher sitting someplace, but trying to get close to what that assumption is. And you can see here, when we look at elementary, Centennial went from 23 on an average down to 21. Sheridan Hills went from 24.7 down to 22.3. RDLS went from 25.7 down to 23. And STEM went from 25.65 down to 24.7 right now. One of the things we are seeing preliminarily, and is already indicated in this, is we're seeing some increased registrations at STEM, or at Sheridan Hills and RDLS. So we've already started to look at making sure that we're making adjustments to those early grades to make sure that those class sizes are manageable. So this isn't totally represented on the average based on what we believe we know right now with some of the trends that we're seeing, but it's indicated that way. So what that means is Centennial ended up with 1 additional section, Sheridan Hills ended up with 2 additional sections, RDLS ended up with 2 additional sections, and STEM ended up with 1 additional section. And then in addition to that, then we have to pay for the specialist time and the other classes that they go to beyond their regular core class to provide the preparation time and things like that for the teachers to have those breaks. So that's what we looked at the elementary level.
And then real quick, as he noted, some increase in applications and enrollment at RDLS and Sheridan Hills. That has seemed to shift over a little bit from STEM, and so we're a little bit lower in terms of our current applications at STEM comparable to projection. And so we also look at those numbers trickling down a little bit to be aware of.
Yeah. So what this provides is some of that flexibility to make some of those adjustments and watch and be a little bit more nimble instead of waiting all the way until September 1 when we have met parents and met students and things like that. We're trying to make some of these adjustments and have put those things in place. Other questions about this? Because I understand, and I'll kind of move similar factors around the middle school and high school. When we look at reducing them from an average class size of 30 down to 28 at the middle school and low 30s down to 30 at the high school, we can see that there are some changes around what that is, going from 30, average class size of 30 down to 27, and an average class size of 32.2 down to 30 based on those classes and stuff like that. So with that, we would have staffed for 165 classroom positions previously. Now we're staffing for 168.8 when we include the specialists.
So we still approved, is it 2 or 3 FTE flex for the fall,
We built into the
depending on
budget
what
3
happens?
FTEs for contingencies. So we have some of that flexibility depending on enrollment, depending on those specific registrations. Once we get closer to the school year, then we still have some additional latitude to make some changes.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Is 3 the number that we've traditionally used? Do I have 5 in my head for the?
We haven't gone up to 5.
Okay.
We've done 3. A couple of years during budget cuts, we reduced it down to 2.
Yeah.
So it's kind of varied between the 2 and 3 allocation for those changes.
Got it. Thanks.
And some of those are even used second semester at the high school because registrations change significantly depending on course participation and things like that.
My question was, knowing how challenging it is to accurately predict and pin down class sizes and the variances that exist across grades, even in the same building, what would you say to a parent in our district that they should expect this fall when they go to school as it relates to class sizes and the additional money that we have put into it?
What should they expect?
And I'm asking that because I do
Yep.
think sometimes the expectations are very
Yep.
different from the reality. So I think the more we can talk about that, the better.
And this is a perfect way to look at it. So as we built it in the model, we worked to kind of address those average class sizes across a building, knowing that one teacher or one additional section is a swing of 6 or 8 students, which it's difficult to commit and say we're always going to have 24 because of 26 then becomes 18, which is a much smaller class size. We have prioritized the primary grades to try to make sure that they are in those lower areas as a priority. But as you can see, so Centennial, where we have additional compensatory, right now, based on our goals, you can see that they are running between 20, 21, and 22 based on what we projected for their enrollment, knowing that there are going to be variations with that. Their 5th grade has 25, so that's kind of the range that we'd be looking at. Sheridan Hills, you can see 19. Again, we're seeing additional enrollment there, so that likely will be higher than that, but that runs up to about 25. RDLS is running between about 20 and 26 in a couple sections, and then STEM is running right pretty much in the average of 23, 24 with 126 in that area. So, those are kind of the range. You can see there's a range already within each one of those buildings of about 5 students in a class size, or in a class or in a different grade level, which is normal for us to be able to maintain those averages and still kind of have the efficiencies and scales of what we need to do.
Would it be fair to say that if we're aiming for that, so right now we're saying at Centennial we're shooting around 21, really 22 if you round it for that average. Would it be fair to say to a parent that 26 students in a class would be an exceptional situation? So if we're exceeding that target by 4 or 5, I mean, is that
At Centennial?
That's Centennial?
That's Centennial.
Yes, we would typically not, well, and we don't see that in terms of the average, so we would need a very unanticipated
Yeah.
number. What makes this different from past years is there's no projected averages at 27, 28, 29, 30, or 31.
Right.
And so there aren't, what we were able to do with the new funding is make sure that there aren't currently, we'll call them those bubble anomalies. We already know going into the year that there are much higher than we would want numbers. There are still things that are a little higher than we might want. The awkward part to tell a parent is, the class sizes are going to be down 2 average across the building, and in kindergarten and 1st grade more, and you may or may not see that specifically within your own classroom and grade.
That's what was leading me to ask the
Yeah,
question.
and that's the hard part, which is
The challenge of average class size.
the challenge of
and the
average
parent
class
experience.
sizes.
The
Right,
challenge of average class sizes and the challenge of supporting choice.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. Those two things come into conflict.
Yeah.
Right, we could cut it off and say, all right, we have this many in, so no more kids at this school, but then we take away parent options for choosing in the district, and we don't want to do that.
Correct.
And I'd say the one other thing to add is what we see is reductions in what currently are those outliers on the high end. So the 29 becomes 23. And so we've taken off that top step in most situations and reduced it down if it's significantly out of line, which is where most of the angst tends to be in those areas. And just as a quick numbers, if we said no elementary will have 25 or more students, that's another $750,000 that would have to be invested to have that. And so that's where we talk about if we set a hard limit, that doesn't become a sustainable limit if we are shooting for a target range. And so that's why we operate off of those averages currently with the current resources that are available and knowing that we can sustain that for another year or two.
Yeah, so I think part of it is us being able to talk about the overall approach that we're taking as a district and the outcomes that we anticipate seeing sort of at that overall level, but then also being able to talk about on an individual classroom to classroom basis, yes, this is going to look a little bit differently, or look a little bit different, so. Yeah.
So again, this just highlights kind of how that breaks down by building as far as where the numbers came out in the current staffing model, and we talked about with those changes. And then the other component about that social emotional learning, and just a little bit more specific piece, it's using $300,000 of general education dollars for that piece. It is one district-wide teacher on special assignment to help coordinate the training and programming and develop consistent systems across the organization and work with individual buildings on kind of building their sustainable models with an additional non-certified staff to support each one of those buildings. Looking at how do we do that in a systematic, aligned way, while at the same time using resources efficiently with the available dollars and creating that sustainability for the program. Tim had said this slide looks like hieroglyphics, which granted it does, but it is meant to just kind of look at how we are looking at some of the changes and what are some of the things that we're going to be talking about moving forward. So to kind of summarize some of the larger pieces, moves to line programs 030 and 031, which are specifically curriculum and staff development, or it's actually teaching and learning and curriculum. Are the two programs there where we've seen different resources put into those over the years, so we're working to try to clean that up, but looks at kind of where some adjustments were, and I'll show you that. There's post-employment insurance, which previously we hadn't budgeted because we were using all the OPEB trust to pay for our post-employment benefits. Last year, and depending on the models, we've started to budget some dollars in our current piece, so we aren't pulling all from the OPEB trust. But we're paying proportional to what our funding is, or some allocation that way. We have some flexibility in how we're doing that. That shows up in the business services budget, just as a place that we have being held for that. Increases the 420 reserves for tuition and expenditures. So that's the general special education areas that we've increased some reserves until we know specific programs that we're needing to allocate for. And a lot of that tends to be in our tuition-based programs where we're buying services from 287 or some of our programs as they move forward. Increases instructional support for 610, which is curriculum development, and 640, which is staff development, to account for planned literacy and innocent classroom programming. So some of the things that we've been saving up and planning didn't necessarily have the resources for, had built some resources into our assigned fund balance to be able to do that at one time. So put some additional components in for how we're developing in the curriculum that we're using, and then increases the 760, which is pupil transportation, to align programs with actual expenditures. This is something we've been doing over the last few years, is we receive near just a slight reduction in the ratio for reimbursement for special education and homeless highly mobile. We had expenditures that were in there that we were hitting the books. We didn't budget for those expenditures because we typically had revenues coming forward that matched it. We're just trying to clean that up, so as we realize the revenues, we can show those into the budget as well as realizing the expenditures, so we've made some adjustments in that as well. So this is the look at those numbers and kind of where they sit. And just to highlight, here's the 030 and the 031, teaching and learning curriculum development. You can see much of it sat in a director of curriculum. Line item which showed up on the budget is literally director of curriculum, which we have not had for a number of years. It's been the teaching and learning department. We have an assistant superintendent that oversees that program. And so we really moved it into 030, which is the state UFAR's coding component of it for teaching and learning, and built that out and moved most of this up into that line item for next year. Other significant pieces here, just kind of a note, the Office of the Superintendent, you can see, had an increase. It really is moving this school elections into the superintendent's budget for next year since we don't have an election, using some of those resources to prepare for any work that we're needing to do, as well as communications tied in with that. And then the next time that we have an election, we would anticipate moving that back into that school elections component. The 107 and 107 component, marketing communications, and this is another one that's kind of convoluted because we have a 107 marketing communications and then 130 community relations, which are very similar in programming and very similar in the work. 130 historically has been more of our publications and resources for your schools and those sorts of things. We had some small expenditures within that marketing and communications. For the purpose of this budget, we just moved it right into the marketing communications. It seemed to be more transparent as far as what we've talked about, the need for the district to do a better job at marketing what we have and the programs that we have tied in with that. So that's where we lined that additional increase of $150,000 into those areas. Administrative technology are things like our student information system and our TIE systems. So that ties into that component of it. It was just kind of a question about what that was, since it's a larger increase from last year's budget. Business services is the finance department. This is where, as I indicated, we've put that post-employment insurance benefit money right now until we know exactly which programs that are going to be running. So that's one of the areas that we've seen some increases as we've built that into the budget. And then we talked about the school elections. Any questions on those categories or programs? Moving on to regular instruction. Looking at these components, we've added money into elementary education and into secondary education in general as part of the operating referendums. One of the things that was a question is we've seen relatively flat or some slight reductions in some of the elementary programming. We've had enrollment reductions in the elementary program specifically over the last couple of years, so even though we've held relatively stable from a district enrollment standpoint, we've seen our secondaries increasing a little bit more, as well as the increase of the voluntary pre-kindergarten program. So that's where those numbers are lower than what we'd be thinking if we were adding the money into that. Also, one of the things that we see within all of these is we're budgeting based on actual staff and projections for their step placements, as well as some assumptions for settlements and things like that. And so as more senior employees retire and as we end up with a newer, less experienced staff, that can impact some of these adjustments in individual line items and individual programs specific to that as well. Another question that came up was we have dual language program, which has small dollar amounts here. We have FIED, which has small dollar amounts, and yet we know we have a whole bunch of FIED teachers that are out there. The dual language school teachers really are ending up in the elementary programming. The foreign language is where most of our direct language instruction is sitting in our secondary program specifically, even if it's teaching in the dual language program, if they're teaching that Spanish area. Other components, health and FIED. Again, this is one of the things that Jim and I were looking at is, how do we have so many health teachers but no FIED teachers? Well, historically, we've basically budgeted them into that 240 line item instead of the 241 line item. And so we're going to be looking at that over the next year to see if that's something that makes sense changing, either in how we name that category and how that lines up with the UFAR state reporting pieces. So Bernice Humnick had made a number of changes to try to come into place with compliance, with UFAR's compliance. Jim has made a number of changes to start to move that path further down the road, just for that ease of communication and transparency with how we report versus how the state reports. Similar band and choir. It looks like we have a whole bunch of band teachers but no choir teachers, yet we know we have music teachers across all of our programs. And so that's just another category that they kind of blend together in two different areas. Any questions on that program? Moving into special education. Again, these are just kind of highlights of those areas. Biggest change here we talked about was in that 420, this generalized special education, which went up about 800,000. Again, we can see that there are some places that have zeroed out, and those things all rolled in there, as well as some other adjustments. The other thing that we did here is we had some conservative tuition assumptions. One of the things most of my colleagues in other districts that are finance directors are always worried about is how our special education actually nets out, because we don't know what our exact tuition payments are going to be to other districts until well into the next fiscal year. So trying to be looking at our trend, but also being cautious and conservative in those areas. And then also, as well as some minor adjustments in FTEs and staffing. We see the general, the special ed students without disabilities, which is a lot of our ADSYS programming and things like that that's served in there that has an increase. And then we also just saw that a lot of staff in this group tend to be making both, tend to be still on the salary schedule and making their step advancements. And so while our salary contract settlements were 2%, we have individuals within these groups in a higher concentration with our special education that are having that salary schedule increase, as well as their step advancements or lane changes and things like that. So this is one where we saw some larger increases in expenditures from what we would originally have anticipated for very similar programming, but those were some of the things that we drilled down to figure out what it looked like and why we saw that change once we reviewed it. Moving on to instructional support and pupil support services. Again, just kind of a few highlights. Curriculum development, you can see in instructional support is where we put some additional resources for some of the staff development and curriculum development, purchases of curriculum and implementation of curriculum, as well as the staff development, which is tied in with our innocent classroom work and some other staff development components of that. And then the last item under pupil support services, this is something that just kind of jumped out. Social work services, we took some histories, but also looked at social work services. 740 is the official UFARS code. And so we have one position, I think it's in an external resource that's charged into that one. And then most of our other social workers are really ending up in the other support services. Outreach workers are ending up in other support services. Budget associated with our achievement and integration budget that's tied in with those pupil support services in those areas is ending up in that other support services. So that's kind of that category of work. And then pupil transportation is the other one that I talked about, where homeless, highly mobile, and special education transportation are areas that we've overexpended what our budget was, and we've really tried to bring this back in line, where last year the expenditures were $3.2 million. Previous to that was 3.1. We were only budgeting 2.8. And again, this was something we had been gradually increasing over time, and so we're bringing it up closer to where that is of $3.4 million. Any questions on that? So what does that all mean for our bottom dollar and our bottom line? When we look at this, it means that we have excess revenue over expenditures, and that's intentional, specific to our efforts to create some sustainability, knowing that we had some additional resources coming in and have built some sustainability over the last couple of years. Right now with that, we have an unassigned fund balance of increase of 4.68 or 468,000, generating projected next year at just under 4.6 million, which is a 6.87% unassigned fund balance projection. We haven't ended out this year yet for July 1, 2018. What we generally will take a look at is, of this money, is some of that money, should it be in the assigned fund category? So things like the turf, what we do is we look at what's the lease on the turf. And one of the things we've committed to is that lease money that goes outside of the actual expenditures will go into that assigned turf fund balance, and so that builds into that category. And we'll make some of those adjustments, so that will change slightly once we kind of balance this piece out. We're projecting within the restricted accounts, and these are all things where we receive specific funds for specific purposes, and they can only be used for those specific purposes. So we have the revenues associated with those and the expenditures, and we really try to balance those out as much as possible. A couple of things just of note, because I know some of the conversations around some of these specific programs have changed. Gifted and talented, you can see we received $60,000 in actual revenue targeting gifted and talented, but as a district we're spending right around $300,000 on our gifted and talented programming in positions. Net impact on that is we have about $238,000, which is transferred into, or where the gifted talented is transferred into the general fund outside of that restricted account, or that general fund is paying for that gifted and talented programming outside of the targeted revenue tied in with that way. Career and Tech and Safe Schools are some other areas where we see that. And then with that, when we balance out the restricted and the assigned turf, we see $9.3 million in fund balance with those restricteds, and then $749,000 increase in that fund balance, which we anticipate being able to help us sustain that programming that we've set up for next year. Any questions on that? These are kind of the impacts on the other funds that we talked about: food service, community services, debt service, internal service, OPEB. Our internal service continues to increase and grow with our insurance program. Here we talked about the community services doing a slight additional expenditure, primarily within the school readiness category for that area within community service, and that's using that fund balance that had transferred in, where we have a current fund balance of about $311,000, which is projected for the end of this year. The construction, you can see, is set up as a separate account with projected $1.5 million in revenue from interest coming into that account, projected for next year, and then those other areas as well. And just kind of a highlight: $749,594 net general fund balance increase, $480,000 is restricted, $468,000 is the in unassigned fund balance. We are using $200,000 from the assigned programs for some of that implementation of the curriculum. There's some areas that we've specifically targeted that purpose for, and being able to access some of that as well. We talked about the transfers, and then the FY19 revenues for other assigned fund categories will be adjusted after actual revenues and expenditures are incurred. So with that, that ends the presentation. You have some additional backup documentation in your report as well. We do need to adopt the budget prior to June 30. Is there a 31 in June? June 30, 2018. Like, that number doesn't quite seem right yet. So June 30, 2018. So we need to do it before then.
No leave year like that.
Yeah, so prior to June 31, we have to do it no later than June 30th.
Okay.
So with that, any questions that you have, otherwise we'd ask for your approval of that budget here tonight.
I just wanted to really thank you for, I know a lot of effort went into this on your part, on the district administration part. Over a weekend, I know you guys got a lot of questions. You did an amazing job of incorporating all those answers into the presentation, and it was very well done, and we really do appreciate the effort. You know, we feel a lot of pressure with the referendum and everything, and we wanted to make sure we were all on track and understood everything, and I think we all really appreciate the effort, so thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, I asked a lot of questions over the last three to 4 days, so thank you for everybody who put time into getting me the answers to the far more detailed questions than what was up here today. And I say that also just so people in the audience and watching know that we have had a lot of conversation about these items leading up to this meeting.
And I would also add, I know you mentioned Bernice and the UFARS codes and all of that. Maybe it's actually becoming clearer, and maybe I'm getting it more every year, but I feel like every year it's improved and it's more clear and easier to follow, so.
I think it's been a transition over years, and it's been great having Jim come in with decades of experience in school finance as well. And you know, we do a lot of kind of what we had the chance to kind of do over the weekend of, you know, why is this, and how come we use this code, and where does this come from? And so we've really tried to be drilling into that. And then hopefully, I know it was talked about in the superintendent's evaluation component, but hopefully you're seeing that work around the goals around transparency of our budget. So we've already had 2 mid-year budget updates of year to actual. Jim did a nice job of pulling in May 31 actuals for this information as well, so you can see kind of where we're at. And that helps us as well take a look at, okay, what is working, where are there changes, are we predicting everything that we can, and stuff like that too, as well as Steve had talked about going out and doing building presentations, where we talked about at the different buildings how we come up with those allocations. So one of the slides in that presentation was kind of that magical sheet of what are those numbers and how do we average class size, and what does, you know, one additional section mean, and how is that sustainable or not sustainable. So you know, we're making some inroads into that. Every time we think we've solved one thing, something else pops up and we go, oh, now that's something else that we can work on too. Unfortunately, with I think there's 8,385 individual budget code line items in just the general fund alone. It's difficult to make all of those adjustments in one year or kind of at one time and stuff like that, but just kind of that represents the work that Jim has done, that Bernice did previously, that the finance department has been working on as well. When you make those adjustments, we want to make sure we're maintaining the history as well as doing what seems logical moving forward, and not to look for sympathy, but to do that in the midst of a new e-finance system over the year where we're trying to create new reports and generate new components of it. Really helps us do a deep dive, but create some of the complexities around that work as well, which we think is in a positive mode of not just doing what we've always done, but making those improvements.
With our assigned fund categories, are those assigned funds, I mean, I know obviously that the turf assigned fund is one that we basically just designed for ourselves. Is that so with all of the assigned fund categories, that that's sort of our discretionary area?
Yep. So the restricted are things that we're required to under state statute. restrict for those specific pieces. The assigned funds are things that are under district control and can set up specific assigned funds. So as we talked about in the audit process, and again at the truth and tax, I was going to say where we are in enrollment, truth and taxation hearing, we have set up some things to start creating some sustainability for things like program initiatives, to set some money aside for those enrollment fluctuations. When we had that large reduction in enrollment, target some funds specifically reserving for those areas. One of the things FPAC and some of our constituent groups have said is we need to try to start to think about how do we put these things in buckets so that we know here's what we've been planning for. Eventually we maybe can roll those back into one piece once we kind of know we've itemized those. But we do have district discretion on setting up what those assigned funds are specifically.
So that's interesting, and it also, so that becomes an important piece of, as we think about what our unassigned fund balance looks like, how big that needs to be, and knowing that, that we are doing some rainy day work with these assigned funds, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good to have that as a transparency piece. Thank you.
Yep. And just to clarify, when we talk, and I mentioned this last time, but when we talk about the sustainability and the investment, it is anticipated that for these programs to last, that some of these either unassigned or even the assigned fund balances will be brought down slightly, while still slightly increasing that from what our target was. But I think that assumes, I want to say, a 5 or 5.5 target fund balance in those areas that we have control over. So we would expect that in a year or two, we may start to have to use some of these funds in order to sustain it, but it gives us some leeway before we have to start looking at either budget reductions or start looking at finding additional resources for the district.
So I think, obviously that becomes the important piece as we go into future years budgeting, depending upon decisions of the legislature that we may or may not be getting flexibility from the legislature. So, yeah. I am happy to move the budget as presented. If there are no further questions, Madam Chair.
I would second that.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tensing, a second by Mr. Ashmead. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the 18-19 preliminary budget is passed. Thank you,
you.
Mr. Holge.
Thanks
Now,
for all your work.
I do want to just stop again. I've kind of thrown out his name a couple times, but Jim did yeoman's work on this and was amazing at kind of drilling into the details, and in addition to learning our system, kind of making this all happen. And so I do want to thank Jim for his work on this specifically as well. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
So we will move on to board policy review, review of 505 student disability non-discrimination.
All right, and so we have brought this policy back. We feel that we have made the final changes. There are actually two pieces. I want to take us to section 4, the 504 coordinator. Just as a reminder, superintendent shall appoint a 504 coordinator. Principals shall appoint a building coordinator, and then the building 504 coordinator, this was one of the things that was asked by the board, will be responsible for appropriate distribution of materials to staff and parents, along with training staff as appropriate. And so our 504 coordinators are actually supported by the district office in their training, their planning, and their preparation. And so within each building, each of those 504 coordinators would be responsible for communication and distribution and training staff as appropriate. The other comment from the board was to consider changing that to 505. From 505 to 504, since it does deal with federal regulation 504. We are actually recommending that we don't do that at this time because there's actually multiple cross-references within this policy and within others. And so we stopped counting at 3 the additional policies that we would need to bring back to change just for that numerical piece. We also thought that once we are not comparing 505 and 504 at the same time, it won't be confusing from a numerical perspective.
You saying we cannot do find replace on this?
We could, but then we would have to bring each of those back to the board for revision again.
Oh, yeah.
And then double check those pieces. And so we just thought for something that will just be technically when we are reviewing the policy be a question, didn't think that that was worth the additional challenges. So with that, I leave it to the board for either questions or a motion.
I just have one question that will not affect the written policy, it's just to put everybody's mind at ease. Just to check my assumption that there are privacy settings around the Google Drives and documents that are referenced in here, so that we are confident that that information is private and only accessible to those who should have it.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Is anyone prepared to make a motion?
I am prepared to move the policy. I believe we've done this one a thorough reading.
I will second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tensing, a second by Ms. Brockie. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the review of policy 505 passes. And we will move on to board policy 504, education of homeless children.
Right, additional what made it slightly complex. So again, this policy returns to us, one slight change. There was also a question asked in relation to this. So this also added that it's part of the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, and the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act. There was a question about the privacy of data. That's actually based on federal law and state law, so while it's not referred to in here as federal law, we will absolutely comply. And we don't always put in federal law or state statute into those pieces, because then as those change, we also change those pieces. But it is something that we are definitely connected to.
Thank you.
I move we approve it.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Ashmead, a second by Ms. Brockie. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and board policy 504 passes. And we will move on to new business and the ties resolution.
Right, so there are a couple things as Corey gets himself set up to move forward. So one thing that we are looking at tonight is a resolution to dissolve ties. And so what ties requires, as we are one of the founding owner members, is resolution from each of the boards involved to dissolve. And one of the assignments that the Director of Technology, Corey Kling, has been given is to set up a plan by which we have plans in place so that there is no interruption of service, there is no interruption of support at the end of ties and when ties dissolve. Ties dissolution would involve the transition of us as owners to us as customers, and Corey is prepared to give us a little bit of background information in relation to that. So with that, Mr. Kling.
Hi, how's everybody doing?
Good, thank you.
Good.
That's the spirit.
All right, so I want to just speak to a couple pieces of this. There's really four major parts in dealing with this dissolution. In fact, I drive past the Ties building every day and I see the for sale sign, so it is truly official. But four major parts of this dissolution. First of all, when you look at what, and I know you guys had a chance to look this over, but the four major parts are that districts or member districts shall not be obligated to pay an amount in excess of $20 per student to cover its proportionate share of TIE's current liabilities. And when we say current liabilities, it's up until June 1st of this year, so just a few days ago, okay? And the second is that the district shall not be obligated to pay an amount in excess of $3 per student to cover its proportionate share of the cost to maintain and operate the TIE's building, which, as I stated, is for sale right now and hopefully will be moved soon. And really, you can see that with that $3 per student to cover its share, that all owner districts are quite interested in the building selling and selling fast. Part C, or the third part, district shall retain all legal rights to the TIE's building and its proportionate share as a TIE's member according to the TIE's bylaws, and no such rights shall be assigned to NJPA, which is the National Joint Powers Association. And finally, the district shall retain all legal rights to receive a proportionate share of any proceeds from the sale of the Ties building for an amount in excess of the debt owed to U.S. Bank according to Ties bylaws, and the NJPA shall have no rights in any such proceeds. So really, as member districts, we own Ties, and therefore we will benefit from the sale of the building. And benefit really would be in quotations a little bit here, I think, in the fact that the debt that we're incurring as an owner district is unfortunately somewhat significant, and the sale will not offset it. So this is an important piece there. Okay, any questions on those four things before I go on to others? No?
Good summary.
Okay.
Nope.
The biggest thing, I guess, to classify it and kind of help us understand why Ties isn't going away, it actually has become Sourcewell. And so what it really means for us is that we go from owner to customers, okay, which means then that we can get out from under any of the products that we want, or on a positive side, we can purchase any of their products that we would want. Okay, so when we go from owner to customer, that date in which that actually happens technically is June 1st, 2018 is when they changed their name, but we officially break from or are no longer owners on the 1st of July. So just let me step back. June 1st, so just a few days ago, Ties renamed themselves to Sourcewell. And so it really isn't even Ties anymore. So I apologize for referring to it wrongly. And then now, just coming up here in a few weeks, on July 1st, is when Richfield Public Schools will become customers of Sourcewell, buying products with no ownership. So that marks that point, okay? And then July 1st of 2019, Richfield Public Schools will work with Sourcewell on a yet-to-be-determined number of products. So during this academic year, or really fiscal year, from July 1st of 2018 to July 1st of 2019, there are basically, I have been tasked with and am planning for evaluating all of our products that we currently own or purchase from Ties/Sourcewell. So we will own them for another month. So what we have to do, or what I'm planning to do then, is really evaluate all that suite of products. Because after that July 1st, 2019 date, it's important to note that those products will still exist. They may eventually be swapped out by a different competitor product with Sourcewell, but Sourcewell will remain as an entity. And they're financially invested in districts staying on with them. So they're going to try and keep districts on, but we are going to take that time, I shouldn't say but, and we are going to take that time to evaluate to see if that's best for us. Okay?
And
so, yes.
As I say, this now becomes a more purely sort of competitive marketplace where we
Correct.
are less encumbered
Right.
in terms of our choice with whatever solution we feel is best suited our needs.
Right, and so they're going to have a suite of products that tend to, they'll be working to try and get them so that they work together well, that they're products that districts will buy into the entire suite of those products because there'll be, a solution that works for their district. But right now they are taking on what Ties has, and eventually while we're evaluating, they're also evaluating their own products to determine if they want to continue working with some of those vendors and companies. Okay. So a perfect example of that really to start with is Synergy. So Synergy as a student information system doesn't, EduPoint, who owns Synergy, decided Ties wasn't doing a good job of supporting their product, and so they dropped support for that product, and so then we actually now will be utilizing Synergy off of Region 1 servers, an entirely different entity, and connecting back to Ties and their products in an interim period of time in this next year. So to give you an example, product one is a Synergy Synergy is a product of Ties. It's a student information system. It's no longer with Ties. Region 1 will take that over, but the point is we're still on it. It's been a bit challenging since adoption, and there are multiple reasons for that. But one of the things that, just to demonstrate that we are evaluating products and that we've started this process already, in this past spring, we formed a task force to really identify, and I shared that in the notes, this long process that we went through to evaluate that product in terms of how it was working for us, the support that we had received, the hiccups, a laundry list of concerns that we had with the product. And then we reached out to not only Synergy providers, which Region 1 and EduPoint are the primary ones, and asked for a support plan to help meet those needs, but we also brought in some other vendors to pitch their product again, and to kind of show us hands-on examples of why their product would be better. This was a very long process, multiple steps, and the committee recommended migration to Infinite Campus, a different student information system, in the fall of 2019 with some nuances, and it's important to note the nuances. And I had mentioned there the detailed notes are in the packet. We are going to reconvene in November of this upcoming November, not next year, November of 2018, as a task force after migrating over to Region 1, after having a new support package and really digging in to see if we can fix our environment, to give a final thumbs up for migration to Infinite Campus as a new student information system provider, because that is not an easy process. It has a lot of moving parts. It takes a lot of training, and it affects all stakeholder groups. Student information system software, of course, is something that affects everybody from parents to students to teachers to all staff, etc. So that was not something that was done lightly, but it was, and as an exhaustive process, we documented that very carefully. And if you have questions on that process, I'd be more than happy to answer them now or in follow-up emails. It's up to you. But that is the biggest one that we've evaluated so far, and I'll move on to other ones if you don't have questions.
What prompted you to look into other options?
Primarily when I came on in January, in meeting with all management group members and all, even the president of the association, Teachers Association, Synergy was either first or second in conversation of major concerns of problems that administrators and teachers were having in their day-to-day work. And a local example of another district that did this similar thing was 196. District 196 looked at their Synergy environment, determined that it was too difficult to maintain, and moved to Infinite Campus. So it's not without precedent. Now, it's also not easy. And so one of the things that we're going to evaluate and really that I will be putting a lot of work into, as well as via training, is looking at Synergy over the summer as we migrate to a new provider, which is Region 1, is to give them a fair shake, to give them an opportunity to see if they can fix our environment, so that when we come to that November meeting, if we determine that Synergy is working and meeting our needs, then that we don't have to make that migration. But the task force really, that was a nuance of that task force conversation was, if things don't improve by November, significantly, after giving true fidelity to it, not just leaving it alone, but actually really digging in and trying to fix it. If it still isn't working for us and we still have this exhaustive list of issues, that we'll make plans then to migrate off of it on Infinite Campus. So I appreciate the question and helping me clarify the response.
I would add that I actually saw the presentations, so I was here for those competitor presentations, and there were some dramatic improvements presented. So if we go that route, it could be really great, but like you said, it is going to be a lot of work. It's not a simple process to transfer that over.
Right. I think the technology group also wants to acknowledge that there is a possibility that the issue is related to the TIES support, the issue is related to Synergy, and so that's why they're waiting until November, because we will have launched the next school year. We'll be able to analyze, okay, we're doing this on our own with the typical Synergy support. Can this product be highly useful? That way we wouldn't have to migrate and change again to Infinite Campus, and that is the preferred solution. Right. But at present, the Technology Committee's perspective is that no, this turned out to be a product that has some significant glitches and needs that we really didn't identify and So, but we're really going to see in that August through October timeframe.
And it gives us a chance then to make sure that we're planning for if we do have to switch, that we really have all of our ducks in a row for a pivot.
Smooth transition.
Yeah. Okay, now, any more on that one? Because the other ones will go quicker. Over the top of those, currently we pay for two products called Cognos and IQ. Basically, these are give us our test data, our socioeconomic data, our data of ethnicity, et cetera. It brings all those together basically into a database or a pool of information where we can organize and sort to pull reports, right? So we can get testing data by ethnicity, we can get behavior data by grade level. These are a database that's on top of a student information system, and you can use it to manipulate the information. Well, right now we're paying for two products through TIES, and those are Cognos and IQ. Cognos is an IBM product, IQ is a TIES product. And so what we want to do is we're going to not only evaluate these two, but we are also going to try and find a way to replace two with one. And so we're going to give Cognos an opportunity to do that and see if they can do that for us. But we are going to, in this, over the summer, I'm forming a new task force on this one. Preliminary demos will come in the early fall. We'll RFP in the early fall after demos. So we'll have a request for pitches or proposals after we have the demos. We'll sandbox the demos or play with the demos as a group in the fall, and then we'll make a choice by November. So the point of that is that's a product two products that they offer, we're going to replace it with one. And there are solutions out that we may stay on Cognos if that works to replace it, or we're going to bring in some other vendors. And there are several out there. Tableau is kind of in our neighboring districts the most popular choice. Okay, make sense? A little?
Who
You go ahead.
Who makes Tableau? Excuse me.
Tableau is, it's a good question. They're actually, it's a business solution, but they have a branch that's just an educational solution. And I believe that Tableau is the company name. The educational solution is smaller and actually just works within your student information system. It's not the comprehensive solution. And there are a couple of other vendors out there that we'll look at.
Both Tableau and Cognos they're kind of the big reporting engine.
Right. Give an example like
marketplace.
Edina uses Infinite Campus and Tableau. It's like a neighboring example. Mm-hmm.
So it's like Coke and Pepsi?
Yes. One of the big thing here is another reflective piece is that when I went to those administrative meetings was I heard several times that data connections were broken. So when we're pulling data for a big data dig that we're doing tomorrow, we had to do a lot of manipulating of pivot tables and pulling data, and things were difficult to mine and farm the data, and more steps than need to be in 2018 with database technology that we have. So part of it is fixing our student information system, and part of it is evaluating the products that we have and seeing if they're the right products, especially in this transition period. So, and again, it's also going back to making sure we're not making change just for change's sake, that we're doing it so that the end result is best for all of our stakeholder groups. Fee pay, this one we are getting better and better at. It's working very well, but again, this is a TIES product, okay? So one of the things about knowing that Sourcewell, becoming Sourcewell, is they can evaluate fee pay and go, we don't really like fee pay, we're going to find a different solution. We're going to build our own. So it's important that we at least take time to look at the product and just consider whether or not if we do pivot, for example, to Infinite Campus, they have a fee payment and messaging service that could potentially replace fee pay in Blackboard and not pay, and therefore you're saving money in that result. So again, it's this evaluatory period that's happening in this next year. To make sure that, that we're looking at the product to make sure it's working for us, which it is, it's working fairly well for us. But if we do make that pivot, might we save money and create efficiencies by pivoting off of fee pay? Again, knowing that it's a TIES created product and could be replaced at any time. So it's being nimble with that, knowing though also that could cause some ripples. And then process of evaluation will be handled by a small task force in the early winter of 2018. So this will be really a small group of people that uses fee pay on a regular basis, food service, activities, et cetera. And so we'll look at it, we'll determine, we'll compare what Infinite Campus has to offer, whether or not it meets our needs. So we're ready to entertain that opportunity, that idea, if we do pivot to Infinite Campus. Okay? Make sense? Okay. The fourth product is iContent. This one is a pretty easy one, except for that the only thing that makes it not easy is that it's a security issue. But iContent, also a TIES product, is a file warehousing system. It basically, software, it basically houses our documents. Okay? So if, we'll spend some time evaluating iContent to determine if that solution works for us. And we will do that after the holidays of this upcoming year. And we'll look at demos in early 2019. We'll put together RFPs in early 2019, sandbox those demos by February, and a choice made by March. And very well, that could just be stay on iContent and see what happens. Same thing could be for fee pay. But we have to go through the same steps of same processes to determine what works best for us. Okay, again, because these being TIES products, we want to make sure we're nimble. And then the final piece is product 5, which is e-finance. And this one, I'm very happy to say, is not a TIES product. This is actually owned by Power School, and therefore we have no intention of migrating off of it, which is very exciting to not have to worry about that one particular one. So it really is just kind of looking at those suite, making sure that we're doing our due diligence to evaluate, to make sure that they're the right products with the software, the student information system, and the data warehousing softwares that we have in place. And the final considerations then, well, Sourcewell will be able to submit competing RFPs, so we'll continue to keep them in the loop, and they'll be part of this process. They'll be able to compete for our business. But making sure that we are customers, we're going to be looking to save money in an open marketplace. And then finally, if and when we do have to pivot off of these, we have to make sure that we have support and emphasis on an extremely methodical rollout with training and support. And if we have to do that over the course of a long period of time, for example, some of these products we could definitely do over 1.5 years as opposed to a half a year. Especially some of these connected ones like fee pay if we transition over to a Infinite Campus complement. That could happen over the course of 1.5 years instead of a half a year. So it's really making sure that we're being extremely methodical with training and support. So questions on any of those pieces?
Thank you. It's no small feat to have a collaborative district, as this technically is, go through this dissolution process. And I just appreciate the thought and intentionality that is very clear, and also just appreciate sort of the multiple rounds of thinking that you and the team that you are working with are doing to really evaluate our options.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
It looks like you have a very busy fall set up for yourself.
Yes. Okay.
So with that, the recommendation of a resolution to approve moving forward with the dissolution of TIES. So it would legally transfer assets and allow that process to continue.
As our district's board member representative to TIES, I will move the resolution as presented.
And I will second the motion.
So we have a motion by Ms. Brockie, a second by Mr. Tensing, and this is a resolution, so I will poll the board. Ms. Brockie?
Aye.
Mr. Ashmead?
Aye.
Mr. Tensing?
Aye.
Ms. Cole?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, and the resolution passes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kling.
Thank you.
We will move on to termination and non-renewal probationary contracts. And Mr. Holge.
Thank you. I have a resolution or a request to authorize the reduction of resolution relating to termination and non-renewals of the teaching contract of one additional teacher. It's an art position at the high school where the position is actually being reduced from a full-time to a part-time position. We anticipate that the person is still interested in that part-time position, but as we allocate specific resources at that high school level and look at the registrations, it's one additional change that is needed yet for this year.
I will move the resolution, observing as we always do, that this is about staffing and budgeting and not about performance.
Second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tensing, a second by Mr. Ashmead. Again, this is a resolution, so I will pull the board. I'll start with Ms. Cole this time.
Aye.
Mr. Tensing.
Aye.
Mr. Ashmead.
Aye.
Ms. Brockie.
Aye.
The chair votes aye, and the resolution passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move on to the gender inclusion policy.
All right, so I am putting forth a recommended new board policy in regard to gender inclusion. We don't have a policy number on this yet because we're putting before you a model policy and also a policy coordinated through the MSB, but then also Laura Booth, our special ed attorney, who is an expert in all areas of school discrimination or school non-discrimination, and then also legal rights of students. So it's an area where we do not currently have a policy, and as we continue to look to support our students and we look through our equity lens for all of our students, this is one that we need to look towards adding. Basically ensuring that all students have a safe, supportive school environment to continue progressing. And so we haven't filled in some of the things that we'll fill in for that second read in the hopes that we have this to start the school year next year. But what it really talks about is some of the things that we talk about in our other policies in our vision, that all students have a right to a fair and supportive education. And this is specifically about ensuring students who are transgender and gender nonconforming that would be included in all school activities like their peers. Making sure that we have school policy that aligns to some of the laws in regard to transgender and gender nonconforming students, and that we are doing all that we can to support all of our students. And so I'm bringing this forward to you for a first read.
I can start. I am glad that we are looking at this and adding it to our policies. And I just had two questions that I'll put forward for the next round. One is the sentence under policy statement, so section 2, and you actually just use this language, that students are included in all school activities like their peers. And I sort of found myself wondering if that word included is the same word we would use for other groups of students, because it actually feels, I guess I would expect to see something like "and not discriminated against," something that feels like it would potentially be a slightly higher threshold than included. So I guess that is a question I have. And then the other question that I'm not sure would come up in the policy itself, but around the bullying, harassment, and discrimination prohibition section, is just how we will support and provide training as necessary for our staff related to this new policy if it is ultimately approved by us.
Yep. And just as a technical point, presuming, and maybe when you bring this back for a second read, we could have a copy of our bullying policy along with it for reference, so that we can be certain that we are fully aligned in terms of language, because this seems as if it would be a sort of an extension, I guess, of that overall. I had a question around transition. So, and maybe my question is completely irrelevant, because I tend to think of transition as a medical or biological thing, but that is presumably not what we're talking about here.
It can be that, but it doesn't have to be medically or fully biological, no. It can be from an identity perspective,
So that the sort of the phase of transition is really defined by the individual as opposed to by.
Correct. There's a
some
lot of
other-
individualization in this particular situation.
Yep, got it.
So kind of in light of that too, I think one of the things that I would say is we would probably want to have some kind of an implementation policy to go along with this. So I looked around at other policies and the MDE toolkit, and it seems like that's a pretty standard thing to have some kind of guidelines and, like Crystal mentioned, training, things like that, so that we are sure that we are kind of going about it in a very thoughtful way and we have a plan. Because, like you said, it is individual to every student. So how each student might want to progress through this can vary. And so we want to make sure that we're meeting the individual needs of the students.
Okay. Other questions, comments? I'm hearing checking some language, aligning to our non-discrimination and bullying policies, and then I am also hearing looking at the MDE toolkit towards the development of guidelines to follow up.
The only other piece that came to my attention, at least as a question, would be the dress code section. And I don't know if dress code is something that we actually have in policy as much as it is school-specific guidelines. So that might be a piece to take a look at.
So we'll check into dress code. And,
Yeah.
okay. One of the positive things.
I guess that here's my question. So my assumption is, and this may be an incorrect assumption, but my assumption is that our dress codes may be gender binary, and we may or may not be fully embracing a gender binary framework with this policy. So that's what I'm wondering, if some of the dress codes may need revision individually.
Right, so I do know that the Safe and Supportive Schools, which began looking at the attendance policy, will also be looking at school discipline policies, school dress codes, and each of those pieces over the course of next year. And so if there are areas where current handbooks and practices, procedures at schools do not align, they would then be realigned, obviously, to align to our board policy. Anything else on the first two? Thank you, we will go to work.
All right, thank you. And we will move to school start times and RDLS and STEM.
So I'm going to transition my recommendation a little bit after some information shared by our board about the survey that we conducted. As I learned more about the survey we conducted about start times when we switched start times this past year, I had read, as I went back and read, I had read and had processed a year later that our input was that 7:30 was sort of the initial start time that we shouldn't go before. And rereading a lot of those comments, I think that the comments often actually stated that in transition to a later start time at the high school, we should not be looking at moving the start time at RDLS STEM earlier. And so a move to 7:40 to 7:30. We did have some input taken by principals from PTO or parent members and staff members that had some general support for moving that, because what we found during the course of this year was that our buses were quite tight, and there were times where our students had to be released a little bit early from RDLS STEM, cutting into academic time a little bit. And so we were trying to find creative ways to do that. But I think it's important for the board to note that as we look at the start time at RDLS STEM and we look at our current start times, there are some very tight, significant transition things that can cut into our academic time or have our buses running late. And so we as an admin team are examining ways for next school year to make sure that we are most efficient and effective with our start times at RDLS STEM. And so I'm not going to move this forward or ask for a recommendation to change the start time today at RDLS STEM. What I want to do is make sure that the board is aware that there are some challenges. As we recall, when we changed start times, we did cut from having an hour across our schools to 50 minutes. And so with any inclement weather or any traffic delays whatsoever, which obviously we've had a lot on our streets and we look to have them for the next couple of years, there are going to be some challenges that we're looking to mitigate so that it doesn't cut into our student academic time. And we're trying to do the best we can with that, something for the board to be aware of.
Just to make sure, you are not anticipating that you would come back to us in the next month or two with a change from where you are now? Because I'm just thinking about, people getting ready for the next school year.
Correct. No, our deadline realistically was today, because we're going to be publishing the calendar tomorrow. We're sending that information out, so we wouldn't be able to put 7:30 as the start time for STEM in the calendar. And so we're going to have to look at different ways to mitigate this problem for next school year, for 18-19. And probably do some significant information gathering to determine what the best solutions are or ways to ease off the situation as best as we can.
Thank you.
That was a good question, Crystal. Thank you.
So we will move on to donations.
All right, so we have Lee Heil, who donated $352 to provide Richfield Middle School students who requested support with the cost of our year-end Valley Fair field trip. So thank you to Lee Heil. Richfield STEM School received $339.99 in donations from the Wells Fargo Community Support Campaign from these donors: Dennis Cox, $180, Patrick Stone, $119.99, and Emily Barris, $40. So thanks, Dennis, Patrick, and Emily. Richfield STEM School received $392 commission check from the Spring Individuals 2017-2018 program from LifeTouch National Studios. So thank you, LifeTouch. And Richfield High School received these donations: $92.34 from the Wells Fargo Educational Matching Gift from their employee Bethany Wiseman, $12.50 from Target employee Kristen Shack, and $250.81 from Richfield United Methodist Church for the Spartan Food Shelf. Thank you, Bethany, Kristen, and the Richfield United Methodist Church.
I will move that we accept these donations with gratitude.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Mr. Tensing, a second by Mr. Ashmead. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and we accept these donations with gratitude. And we will move on to advanced planning and a legislative update from Mr. Yanowski.
All right, so we have obviously closed the legislative session. Most of the bills have gone to and either been acted on or vetoed by the governor. There's a couple of pieces. There are going to be approximately $25 million in school safety grants that are going to be served on a first-come, first-served basis. So we are working tirelessly to prepare. We can pair this with our capital facility improvements that we already have planned, and it's a way to have the state help match some of the work that we're putting in. And so we anticipate applying for that. They do expect a lottery-based system in that first-come, first-served situation. So we'll see, but we will certainly be at the table for that particular funding. The other piece and one of our higher priorities is that not specific to education, but the gap between funding of the statewide pension programs has been significantly closed through the Ways and Means Tax Committee. And so there is going to be some increases that are not going to be specifically related to school districts, and they are actually paying through this from a different statewide funding mechanism. And so that is one of the things that we are very pleased that got accomplished. And if you recall, our priority was to close the gap between the actual funding of pensions and pensions without it actually impacting schools. The governor then vetoed some of the other education components, which has a mixed bag. So we looked at some AMSD approximations of well over $1 million of unfunded mandates within there that the governor did veto. However, there was also some school funding in there that the governor did veto. So we lost out on some opportunities for funding, but actually there was more than that in terms of mandates that were expected in regard to testing and other pieces that actually were not then funded that were also in that bill. One of the messages we talked about as a member of the AMSD Legislative and Executive Committee is that it's important that we're very clear, is that there was proposed funding for schools, there was proposed emergency funding for schools, so in this past year there was no funding for schools, and certainly not significant funding for schools to close the special education cross-subsidy or to support schools who are struggling with their current financial budget. And it's important that we use that language so that we recall a year from now when it is a biennium budget package that we remember that there was a lot of conversation about the need for school funding that actually did not come through in the year 2018.
Thank you. So information and questions from the board.
I got a call asking what the high school dress code policy is. Particularly related to warm weather and girls' attire.
As a parent of high school girls, I've had to adjust my own expectations. So yes, my girls have have helped me learn to relax.
Well, apparently this parent has not reached that level yet.
At any rate, I can say that my understanding, and Steve, please confirm this, my understanding is that LaTanya, that our principal, has worked with students at the high school.
So I'm
around
calling up the
clarifying
handbook
that.
as we speak. Richfield High School does not have a formal dress code. Students will assume good judgment in wearing appropriate clothing. Clothing and personal hygiene become a concern when they cause disruption, are offensive to others. All right, so then we have clothing with vulgar, sexual, violent, gang, harassing, drug, or alcohol themes are not to be worn. Hats, coats, gloves, jackets, caps, visors are to be left in lockers or backpacks. Hooded sweatshirts may be worn. Clothing must cover the midriff and chest. Undergarments must be covered, and so on and so forth. And so,
So they can wear shorts as short as they want, is basically what it says.
according to that, and I didn't read through them all, the shorts must cover the student's rear when standing or sitting.
Correct. So, and again, I think the important point is this I'm pretty sure, I mean, this is a different policy than what was historically in place, where they used to have the
Fingertip?
maybe it wasn't
The
for some other
fingertip?
sorts of skirts, but
Yeah, yeah.
at any rate, I know that this was an issue of student feedback to our principal around the attire that girls in our high school wanted to wear. And LaTanya listened.
So, and I know that is being examined also, like I said, that'll be reviewed by the Safe and Supportive Schools group and the Social Emotional group as we look to realign and align and do that work with all of our handbooks over the course of next year.
I hope that in the case we have to have these conversations, we can frame them with students about dressing professionally, and not because my way of dressing is going to be disruptive to somebody's attention, because it's not my job as a girl to tell you where to look.
Yeah.
So, just saying.
And frankly, that conversation has come up in our household as well. I mean, with exactly that feedback from my young women who are making that point. So it's a good point.
I have a couple things. One, I wanted to follow up on a conversation that came through public comment a couple of months ago about voter registration efforts at the high school. So we did have a small group of community members and current high school students, with the support of our high school administration, do voter registration efforts during a lunch period. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. It was right after our last board meeting. And in that just 2 lunch periods, we registered, I think it was 39 students who are going to be 18 by election day to vote. So that is exciting, and plan to do another 1 or 2 in the fall as we have more students who are thinking about the November election. And just want to give special appreciation to the 3 high school students who made the announcements over the microphone during the lunch hour about what we were doing, and they were going table to table to get their classmates to consider registering to vote. So it was really exciting. The second thing, and I sort of referenced this before, but at the last District 287 board meeting, we had a presentation on the Hennepin Tech program through 287, which to me was such a good example of my not totally understanding all of the programs that exist for our students through our relationship with 287. So there are many courses that are available for our students to take via 287 at Hennepin Tech in Eden Prairie. And we had 43 students this year from Richfield Public Schools take some aspect of a trade, a culinary course. There's law enforcement courses that are available. So it just got me thinking about how we have heard from our community that those are the types of offerings that we need to be doing more of, and I think making the connections with this Hennepin Tech program that we already have access to. And that students can be here at the high school and just leave for that one period at Hennepin Tech and then come back. So it's kind of just a good learning and awareness building thing for myself. And then the very last thing I was gonna say is last week I got to spend a bunch of time at the South Education Center through 287 and attend graduation ceremonies that were being held in that building. And the last one of the day was their alternative learning center. And so all of the students who got their high school diplomas that day got them through Richfield Public Schools, is what their diploma says. And quite a few of the graduates are Richfield residents. And the graduation speaker is a former Richfield High School student who has gone to 287 and has found really great success in their ALC program. So it was just a really inspiring, great way to again see the connections that exist between Richfield Public Schools and District 287, especially at South Education Center here in our own community.
Well, thank you. So we will move on to future meeting dates. July 16th is our next meeting, 7 p.m. regular board meeting, and as it's the only meeting in July, there will be public comment. And August 6th, also 7 p.m. board meeting, and there will be public comment at that meeting also. Are there any suggested or future agenda items?
I just want to share, I am going to be absent at next month's meeting.
Okay. We will have a closed session following this meeting in alignment with Minnesota Statute 13D03 for contract negotiations and superintendent evaluation. If anyone is prepared to make a motion.
I would move that we move into closed session at this time.
No.
We'll adjourn the regular meeting after we finish our closed session.
Right, we moved to closed
Yeah.
session.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll second that then.
We have a motion by Mr. Tenton, a second by Mr. Ashmead to move to closed session for contract negotiations and superintendent evaluation. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and we will move to closed session after a short recess.